There should be a lot of balloons. And you have flowers all over the room, you hear? Lots of them. An insane amount of fresh flowers. Better in dark cherry. That's great. Aiden gave out instructions in the tone of a man who was used to having his ideas put into action immediately. Tomorrow was his wife's anniversary, and Aiden simply couldn't afford a modest celebration. This wasn't about love for Emma or even respect. It was about status. Aiden was a middle-class businessman. He wasn't very successful, but he had a steady footing, which made him feel overconfident at times. A few years ago, he was a simple guy with ambition, dreaming of building his own business and getting rich. He started the business not by himself, but with a partner. But then somehow Aiden managed to take full control of the business. Spouses of successful businessmen, as a rule, prefer to visit beauty salons, go shopping, and gossip. But Emma, contrary to stereotypes, woke up every morning to go to work. She liked to give people joy and beauty. She worked in a flower store. It was there that they met, when he came in before a date with another girl to buy a bouquet of roses. But when he saw Emma, he realized that he was in no hurry. Refined, fragile, with deep eyes and a proud curve of eyebrows, she seemed unattainable, as if descended from the painting of an unknown artist. "Let me give you a bouquet of roses, the most delicate ones, just like you." Aiden did not think of anything better than to ask the most banal question he could think of in a flower store. "Actually, it's my privilege to offer people flowers," Emma laughed, and it sounded to Aiden like silver sprinkling. "Well, then I'll buy you ice cream," Aiden offered, still staring at the girl mesmerized. "I only like ice cream, like when I was a kid," Emma said, as simple-minded as she was. And apparently it became so light, as if a spotlight was lit above him. And that was love. Then there was the period of beautiful dates to win the heart of an unattainable beauty. Aiden had to think up something new and incredible every time. A hot air balloon ride, a trip to the sea on a yacht, a date in a gazebo, night walks through the city, and flowers, flowers, flowers. Eventually, Emma gave in. There was a wedding, a sea of guests, vows of love and fidelity, and a honeymoon. And then the usual family routine began. A woman thinks that once she's married, life will be like a fairy tale. But with men, everything is arranged differently. Not without reason, they say that in essence, every man is a hunter. And when he is caught up with his prey, he loses special interest in it. Aiden, Emma's union, was no exception. After a few years, the spouse began to distance himself. Emma continued to love him, but sadly noticed that her spouse became inattentive to her, could often offend, tear anger after a busy day. Emma tried to avoid conflicts, to smooth out situations. In her heart, she blamed herself for not being able to fully open up as a woman, could not give birth to a child. And when after another trip to the clinic, it turned out that the results of the test were bad, Emma had a nervous breakdown. "I can't do this anymore. I want the baby. I want to change his diapers, feed him from a bottle. I want to see him grow up and take his first steps," Emma sobbed. Aiden paced the room with quick steps and tried not to raise his voice at his wife. They had discussed the subject many times. His husband had pretty much accepted the fact that they wouldn't have children of their own. Emma, on the other hand, wanted a child, and she'd gotten it into her head that they could take a baby from an orphanage. "Look, it's someone else's baby. You have no idea who his parents are, who they were. There could be a set of genes in there that you're not going to be happy about. Normal people don't leave their kids in an orphanage." Aiden argued with his wife because he had his own views on adoption. But at some point he gave in to the persuasion. True, then it was on this very subject that the main scandals occurred. At every opportunity, Aiden remembered to remind him that Emma couldn't give birth to a child of her own. That's why she had to raise it, spend her money on someone she didn't know. "You are a holy man." Another would have thrown out such a wife long ago. But you took someone else's child and raised it. But you spend so much time and effort to provide for them, so they don't need anything. She doesn't appreciate you." "Oh, she doesn't appreciate you," her mother-in-law grumbled, dusting the furniture, which was already clean. When you're doing housework, you see, need independence. Laughter, that's all. As long as you don't have to stay at home. I'd rather bake a chicken for myself, make borscht for them." "No, this is not the daughter-in-law I dreamed of," the old mother persisted. And Aidan, listening to her, did not hurry to stand up for his wife. Such words made him feel good about himself. He really began to believe that Emma was unworthy of him. And while the mother was praising her beloved son, the key to the front door turned twice. Emma entered the house. When she saw that her mother-in-law was visiting, she realized she wouldn't be able to rest today. Usually, Leah would make innocent small talk about how lucky her son and her friend were, what a caring wife she was. Then she would go on to lament that there was no one to clean the house or cook dinner. And then she'd end up making direct accusations against Emma. At first she tried to justify herself, not realizing what her fault was. And then she stopped. She simply bore the reproaches in silence. She cried into her pillow after her mother-in-law left, but she didn't want to fight with Aidan again. "Emotchka's here," her mother-in-law said in a voice 2 tones lower than usual. It was a sign that she was about to launch another attack on her victim. And yet without any female attention at all. "So that's what I came to warm him up. I thought he'd get married and his wife would take care of him. But it turns out he can't do without a mother's attention and care. And you're still selling your flowers. You don't need them. Some roses are more expensive than your own husband. And it would be a business, but it's just a dalliance," Leah continued. Emma smiled strained and went into the room, realizing that even on the eve of the anniversary, her mother-in-law did not want to leave her alone. To be fair, Leah was very fond of her own son, and if in the place of Emma was Princess Diana herself, it would still not suit the jealous mother. So, as they say, nothing personal. The next day was to be an unforgettable one. Emma woke up in a good mood, and despite the fact that her mother-in-law tried with all her might to get the opposite reaction, her daughter-in-law decided that today was her holiday, and she would not let anyone spoil it. The car smoothly parked near an expensive restaurant. The couple stepped out of the snow-white limousine. One could imagine that now they would walk down the red carpet, and the paparazzi would start clicking their cameras, trying to capture the objects of attention. Flash. Of course, Aidan and Emma didn't have that kind of fame, but they looked as good as Hollywood actors. And Aidan liked luxury. That's why the reception at the restaurant was decorated at the highest level. The room was covered with balloons and flowers. It seemed to Emma that she was in a wonderland where only joy and happiness reigned. The guests smiled, drank champagne, made toasts and good wishes. Emma, in thin stilettos and in a long, elegant dress with a deep neckline bathing the attention of friends and acquaintances, and her beloved husband gently supported her under the elbow. Suddenly, Emma's gaze snatched familiar faces from the crowd. Her mother-in-law stood quite close by and smiled evilly. That smile gave Emma a chill inside. It made her feel bad. The mother-in-law was not alone. Next to her was a young woman, quite pretty, but her clothes and makeup were too bright, provocative and vulgar. It was as if the lady had not come for a birthday party, but had prepared herself for battle. In a way, that's exactly what it was. The mother-in-law, throwing oblique glances at Emma, turned to her interlocutor. "But my daughter-in-law could have chosen a more modest dress. She's not 20 years old. It would suit you, Mealy. It's too revealing for Emma." Emma could hear their conversation clearly. It was unpleasant that her husband's mother could discuss her with someone she knew. Leah's interlocutor smiled a satisfied smile. "Oh, you've always had fine taste. I'm surprised Aidan didn't choose a woman like you as his wife. And they also say a mother is always the standard for a man." She moved closer to Leah and hugged her, as if she were going to tell her deepest secrets in her ear. Both women kept their eyes on Emma. "I wish I'd met you sooner," her mother continued. "You two are so wonderfully suited to each other." It was noticeable that the two ladies were beginning to attract the attention of those present. Glances were thrown at them, and behind Emma's back there was soft laughter and whispering. A few phrases reached her ears, enough to make her realize who the girl was and what she was doing near her husband's mother. "You've got a nerve. He invited his mistress to his wife's birthday party," said the lady with a glass of red wine and took a bite of marmalade. "Why is that fashionable progressive? Or maybe they even live in threesomes," replied the lady in question. "You're already dreaming," the lady interrupted him with irritation. "We're decent people, not like some people." Emma slowly looked around at those present. There could be no doubt about it. They all knew that the stranger her mother-in-law had brought to the party was her husband's mistress. It turned out that Aiden didn't even try to hide it. And if this girl had the nerve to come to the party and announce herself like that, then Aiden had promised her something serious. How stupid and shameful, Emma whispered almost to herself. She wanted to leave, to run away, never see those people again, or her traitor husband, or her mother-in-law, who had been harassing her for so many years. And now she was in for a surprise. But Emma did not allow herself to show weakness. She smiled, gathering all her inner strength, and walked to the stage. The guests watched her, not understanding what exactly the birthday girl was up to. "Dear friends," Emma's voice was gentle, but you could feel the notes of steel in it. "Aiden and I are delighted to have you with us on this festive day. It was a revelation to me today that outsiders know more about our family life than I do. But if my spouse chooses to do so, so be it. I believe that everyone has the right to freedom of choice. Aiden has made his choice, and my choice is not to participate in this spectacle." Everyone present was silent, waiting to see how the speech would end. None of their friends and acquaintances could imagine that the couple would ever break up. Aiden was a successful businessman. You don't walk away from a man like that. Emma was beautiful, understanding, loving. You don't leave a woman like that. From the stage came words that shattered all notions. "Aiden, it's a pity that you didn't find the courage to admit that you love someone else. I wish you happiness. You are free. I'm not the type to live with a foot-cheater." Emma came down from the stage with her head held high and proudly walked past the guests to the exit. The attendees silently parted. Aiden didn't expect this turn of events at all. As a man who had enough money, he was accustomed to the fact that many problems could be solved by just naming a sum of money. And he was sure that Emma would not decide to divorce, would not risk her well-off life. Aiden watched them anxiously from the moment when the mother-in-law had merely crossed the threshold of the restaurant. In his heart, he hoped that everything would be all right. But when Emma took the stage and began her speech, Aiden turned pale. He cast angry glances at his mother, wondering why she brought her mistress here. His mother had once introduced him to Millie herself. The girl was the daughter of Leah's good buddies. Aiden had liked her, and all this time he hadn't hidden the presence of another woman. But it was certainly not in his plans to introduce his wife to his mistress. As soon as Emma left the restaurant and the party atmosphere behind her, her strength left her. Tears rolled down her face. She felt as if she had been stabbed in the back. The only person who jumped out after her was her son. Emma was walking so fast that Joe could barely keep up. He didn't quite understand exactly what had happened, but he could see that his mother was crying, and he could barely hold back the tears himself. "Emma, Emma, where are you going?" There were shouts as the woman almost ran away. The mother-in-law, stumbling in heels too high for her age, and regretting her action, tried to catch up with her daughter-in-law. Leah, seeing her son's unhappy reaction to what had happened, was a little scared and wanted to make things right. Only catching up with Emma wasn't going to work for her. waving her hand at her runaway daughter-in-law. She walked in the opposite direction to plunge into the noise of the restaurant. There were plenty of treats, music, champagne, and not at all to the point of her sister-in-law's tears. Aidan was also under the impression of his wife's speech for a while. He had not expected Emma to be so harsh. He did not run after her, because he thought that such behavior was beneath his dignity. When she calms down, she'll come to him, he decided. "Waiter, 2 times 100, he voiced the order to the young man who served the banquet. "Honey, let's dance." He put his arm around Mealy's waist as if nothing had happened 20 minutes ago. But guests also switched to hors d'oeuvres and small talk. So after half an hour, no one really thought about the birthday girl. At that time, Emma and her young son wandered in the darkness through the park and did not notice how they went into the deepest part of the park, where the lilac bushes were taller than a man and created a hedge. Emma was beginning to recover a little from her shock, and now, as she looked around, anxiety began to overtake her. She wasn't quite sure what part of the park she and her son had found themselves in and how to find a way out to get home. Emma tried not to show her child that they were lost. She only held his hand tighter. Suddenly the bushes rustled. Emma turned around at the sound of crunching twigs and turned pale. Out of the darkness, 3 boys came toward her. They made a repulsive impression. So one of them was twisting a chain on his finger and then returning it to its original position. The other pulled a cigarette from behind his ear and smoked it defiantly, blowing the smoke in Emma's face. The third smirked and took something out of his pocket. She saw the blade of a knife gleam in the light of a distant lantern. "Do you want to take the bag off yourself, or do you want help?" one of the hooligans asked. "Money, phone card. Let's turn the purse out," added the other, grinning unpleasantly. Her son clung to her and kept his eyes on the guys, who clearly carried a threat to him and his mom, realizing that even if she called for help, no one in the depths of the garden would hear her. Emma decided not to take any chances. "Yes, okay, I'll give you everything I have," she said hurriedly, searching for her wallet and phone in her purse. "Take it, but don't hurt us. You're scaring the baby." There were tears in her voice. "It's okay. Let her get used to adulthood," one of the boys said, reaching for the purse, and the other 2 laughed, appreciating his joke. Emma blinked her eyes a lot, not knowing what to do next. Suddenly she heard footsteps. A man in his 60s appeared in the alley, dressed in a work uniform that made it easy to tell that he was a park employee. The stranger walked at a brisk pace. First, he pulled out a flashlight and pointed the light directly at the guys who were trying to rob Emma, and then he blew an alarming whistle. So the hooligans hadn't expected such a turn. Apparently, they were used to this far corner of the park being usually empty, and now they needed a bystander. "Let's go, gang," shouted the one who was playing with the knife so brazenly. I didn't have to repeat the suggestion to leave twice. The hooligans disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, and in the same way, through the bushes. "Are you all right?" asked the man, approaching them. "They've got a nerve, they're not afraid of anyone. Tomorrow I'll notify the park administration to have the lights repaired, and we could use a patrol. It's not the first time I've encountered these bandits." He looked at the boy, who was still clinging to his mother and experiencing her shock. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Did they take anything from you?" worried the accidental rescuer. "No," Emma replied. "Thank you very much. If it hadn't been for you, I don't know how this would have ended." "Well, I guess I'm just in time," Dave said. That was the name of the old man who had come to the rescue so unexpectedly. "What are you doing out here in the park so late? Are you lost?" "Yes," Emma admitted. "Let me lead you out," he suggested. "We don't really have anywhere to go." Emma admitted. "It's my birthday today, and my husband and I had a fight," she said, waving her hands as if to show her companion the situation she was in. After a few seconds of silence, as if weighing the situation, Dave made an unexpected suggestion. Let's go to my place. It's too late to look for any options now. The boy is tired, he can hardly stand on his feet. And I have a place. We'll figure it out in the morning. When won't we make you uncomfortable? Emma asked. And you don't live alone, do you? Emma figured in her mind that her new acquaintance's son must be about the same age as she was. You know, it's probably not very convenient. We should probably look for a hotel. She began to worry. Oh, come on, Dave said. My son is paralyzed. He has his own room. I'll put you and the baby in the hall. I can't let you go. That's it. Is it nighttime? You could see he was determined. Let's go. It's not far. You can walk here, he assured me. It was already dark in summer, but they felt safe with this old man. Pardon my curiosity. What happened to your son? Emma asked when they came to a better lit area. A tragic accident, Dave replied glumly. He didn't like to talk about the subject. It was a pain he carried somewhere deep inside him. But here was Emma he liked, trusted. Nick was a successful businessman. He didn't like the bland life, traveled often, played sports. He was especially attracted to skydiving. He made not 1 and not 10, but more than 100 jumps. You could say he was a professional in this business. Emma listened to her interlocutor very attentively. This story was more like a confession, and therefore it penetrated into the very soul, into the very heart. What about the family? Emma asked out of inertia and immediately regretted that she had been so tactless. But the old man, as if not noticing anything, immersed in his bitter memories, continued. Isabel at first tried to support her husband, but when she realized that there was no chance that he would get back on his feet again, much less return to the business, she left. Now she is the wife of another man. That's life with all its zigzags. There was no pity, anger, or reproach in Dave's voice. He had already accepted the fate that had befallen him and his son, and he knew he just had to move on. He'd get up in the morning, go to work, take care of the sick, and help others as much as possible. Despite the misfortune that had befallen him, Dave remained as compassionate and decent a person as he had ever been. Yes, no one is immune to accidents, Emma agreed. Emma said quietly. She didn't know what words of comfort to offer, and it seemed that her companion didn't need them. He simply told her what was on his mind and did not expect any answer. It wasn't exactly an accident, Dave said suddenly. It was obvious that the question had been on his mind for a long time. Of course, nothing is proven, but his son had always been responsible for the jumps, and they had checked everything several times. And then the parachute jammed. It's weird. As a result, he suffered a spinal injury and the business went to his partner. Dave was silent. Emma was silent too. The story she had just heard sounded more like some kind of mystery story. And as detectives say in such cases, you have to look for someone who benefits from it. But Emma had nothing to do with investigations. Besides, this day had been filled with its own upheavals for her. She decided to think about what her new acquaintance had told her later. You can not only stay at my place tonight. If you have nowhere else to go, you can stay here. We have plenty of room. Dave came back to reality from his sad memories, and as a practical man, got straight to the point. How are you? He turned to Emma's son, who had been silently and obediently walking beside him, holding his mother's hand tightly. All right, replied the boy. He was not used to complaining. Do you have any friends or relatives who can support you? You could use some support right now, Dave continued. He wanted to help the woman, but at the same time he knew that they were strangers to each other, so he should look to his family for help. Emma sighed. Aiden and I have mutual acquaintances. I don't want to go to them. You can see why. My parents don't live here in the provinces. She hesitated. But then she decided to tell Dave her secret. My stepfather drinks and then becomes aggressive. My mom is afraid of him, and she's afraid to be without him. So she lives in fear. I don't want to go back there. "You bastard." Dave turned his head toward Emma. He looked at Emma with a look that said he understood, but he didn't waste any more words. "Well then, it's settled. You're staying with us." "Son, do you mind?" Emma asked and stroked Joe's head. He nodded and walked merrily along beside the adults. The house Dave lived in was small but cozy. Emma liked it immediately. Nick was asleep when they arrived, so her father didn't bother him. Come in. I'll make some tea and something to eat, and then you can go to bed. It's easier to look at all the problems in the morning," suggested the owner of the house. Emma didn't object. She was pleased to feel that this unfamiliar man cared about them. But before she drifted off to sleep, she found her spouse's number in the phone list and added it to her blacklist. And she didn't want to know anything about Aiden from now on. Sunlight slipped into the room through the curtains and touched Emma's face, as if to remind her that a new day had begun. When she opened her eyes, she didn't immediately realize where she was. Then she remembered yesterday, her birthday, and the attack. Here in the silence of the room with the sun bunnies, it seemed as if nothing had happened. Just a bad dream. Like she wasn't in someone else's house, but at her mom's house as a child. Unfortunately, it wasn't. She had to get up. Emma changed her clothes, tidied herself up. There was a soft knock on the door. "Excuse me, I have to go to work." "I'd like you to meet my son," Dave said. Emma followed him in. The room was clean and bright. "Hi, I'm Nick. You must be Emma." "My father told me." The boy's face was pleasant, even handsome, but pale. That's what happens to people who seldom spoil themselves with sunshine. Alex held out his hand and shook it in a friendly way. "Emma, you take care of things like a hostess. There's everything in the kitchen. I'm in a hurry, so I'll ask you to make breakfast for everyone." Emma nodded in agreement. Despite the friendliness of her hosts, Emma felt uncomfortable in someone else's house. Nick turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist with a good sense of humor. She found him interesting, and even Joe hung around the new acquaintance, asking him the most unusual questions. A few days passed. The phone was silent. Perhaps Aiden had tried to get in touch, but was blocked, and no one else was looking for Emma. "Emma, I'm going to ask for your help. Nick is a bedridden man, you can see that. And people who are bedridden get into trouble. That's why you have to treat the body regularly." Emma nodded understandingly. She wanted to do something to help these people who had been so kind. Dave had taught her how to take care of his son. Another morning came. Emma opened her eyes and smiled. The birds were singing outside the window. The morning chill had not yet changed to the heat of the day. "Nick, am I disturbing you?" "Are you awake already?" she asked, opening the door. "No, I haven't slept in a while." "Come in. I'm a lark by nature, used to get up early. I used to go jogging in the morning. Until this happened." He nodded his head at his own body, covered with a white sheet. Emma stepped closer. "I need to work on your back," she said. Emma tried to act calmly, like a nurse doing her job, but it was hard to hide her excitement. "Yes, of course," the patient agreed, though he was not enjoying his role. Emma deftly pulled up her t-shirt and began gently rubbing her back to stimulate circulation. She looked at Nick's young body and felt that he had once been well trained, his muscles still holding their shape, and she felt womanly pity for him. How hard it was to be bedridden, especially at such a young age. Alex seemed to sense her thoughts. "You don't have to feel sorry for me. It's your own fault. I took life too lightly. Luck seemed to come my way. I wanted to challenge fate more and more. But fate will always outplay a man," he concluded. It was as if he summed up those thoughts that tormented my soul from day to day. "And is there nothing that can be done?" Emma blurted out. "There is," Alex answered briefly and was silent. He liked this woman, who had come into his life so recently in a strange way. She was caring, intelligent, He had no illusions and knew that as soon as something in the guest's life got better, she would leave, and they would never see each other again. But now she was here, touching him, worried about his future. He felt like he needed someone other than his own father. The doctors say it's a complicated operation, but it's insanely expensive. So I have two options: either save up money or try to get a quota. But the former is unrealistic under my circumstances, and there is little chance of the second option. For the first time in her life, Emma regretted not having any money. Yes, she was not poor, but it was all her husband's money. "Oh, if I could do anything to help, I'd give anything so you could walk again," she said. "Thank you," replied Nick. He was glad that at this moment he had his back to her, and Emma could not see his face. Meanwhile, in another house, richer and better furnished, two people were enjoying their freedom. It didn't take long for Aiden to grieve that his wife had left him so abruptly, and Mealy couldn't believe that she'd gotten the man she'd dreamed of so easily. "Honey, why are you stalling? Why don't you just get your divorce finalized? Let's get married and go to the Maldives. It's paradise. Sammy told me about their vacation. I want to go there too." "I'm not pulling it. I'd be happy to sign the papers. All these years together, and she's disappeared. She doesn't call. She doesn't answer my calls," Aiden said, annoyed. He wasn't used to being treated that way. That was why he was angry with his wife. Leah, as was her custom, came to the house unannounced, even though the landlady had changed. Aiden's mother was not going to change her habits. She believed that everything should be under control. No one could do it better than her. Once again, her commanding voice rang through the house. "Hello, Mealy." "Aiden, I need to talk to you," she addressed her son. Aiden and his mother walked out into the hall. Leah took out a thin cigarette from her pack and lit it. "Son, what's up with your divorce?" "I think you're being too careless," she threw a disgruntled look at Aiden. "Don't forget that as long as you're married to Emma, she's entitled to your fortune. You need to get the divorce finalized as soon as possible. Right now, she's probably still reeling from the fact that you have someone else, but I think she'll come to her senses soon and demand half of what we have. Do you want to give half, or what are you waiting for?" His mother put out her cigarette with a sharp movement, not even finishing it. Aiden was silent. He had really missed the point, and he wasn't going to share anything with his wife, of course. Emma was cooking dinner in the kitchen, and the pleasant aromas wafted throughout the house. She liked to try new recipes. Now she was baking meat with different spices and vegetables. "It should be good," she said, and smiled to herself. The bitterness of her separation from her husband was fading, replaced by the care and companionship of Alex. She clearly liked the man. And after yesterday's conversation, she suddenly realized that she was entitled to some of the property that should go to her after the divorce. And if she had not stooped to solving material questions before, now this money could help the boy to have an operation, and the urge to save him gave her determination. Emma prepared to fight for her right in court. When lunch was ready, Emma set the tray down and went to Alex's room as usual. "I'm not hungry," he replied dryly to Emma's offered treat. He was usually friendly, never complained about his appetite. But today was the first time Emma had ever seen him in a bad mood, not knowing how to behave in such a situation. She hesitated. "How about tea and cakes, then? There's some left over from yesterday," Emma suggested, worried that the young man wouldn't go hungry. "No, I don't want anything. I just want to be by myself," Alex answered rudely and turned his face towards the window. Confused, Emma went out, not understanding what was going on and what was her fault. Alex hadn't left the room for a long time and didn't communicate with any of his former acquaintances, but he never stopped following the news in the business sphere. And today he found out something that made him uncomfortable. Aiden, Emma's husband, turned out to be the traitorous companion who'd stolen the business from him. And accordingly, Emma is also involved in this story. They say husband and wife are the same Satan. And now this woman by chance is in his house and sleeps with him under the same roof. Or maybe it's not coincidence at all. Maybe some cunning plan. These thoughts tormented Alex. And even more frustrating was the fact that he had grown accustomed to Emma, had begun to trust her. Worried that her new acquaintance was without lunch, Emma decided to visit him again in a couple hours. She hoped that the bad mood had changed, and now Alex would be like he used to be. There was a quiet knock on the door. Emma entered the room, but his mood was even worse. Bad thoughts tormented the young man, driving him to frenzy. "What more do you want?" he almost shouted, addressing her. "What else do you want from me? It's not enough that I become an invalid. You've taken everything from me, you and your husband." Emma almost dropped the tray from her hands from the unexpected onslaught. Alex couldn't stop himself. He told Emma that he had found out who she really was, that she had tricked her way into their house, that it was her husband's fault that he had almost been killed and crippled for life. Emma listened with her eyes wide open in horror. She couldn't believe what Alex was saying, and the young man had to provide proof as well. "But I wasn't Aiden's wife at the time. I didn't know anything about it at all," she stammered, and the tears from the undeserved accusations flowed by themselves. It was like an electric shock to Alex. He wasn't an angry man by nature. And now a confused woman was standing in front of him, crying, and he was the cause of her tears. "Go away. I need to be alone," he finally said. "Go away." Emma stormed into her husband's office like an angry lioness. She didn't need to be polite. She was seething with resentment and hurt. This man had lied to her, deceived her for so many years. He was a scoundrel. But she would make him undo what he had done. Aiden was sitting in his chair, looking over some papers, when suddenly he saw Emma. Without saying hello or apologizing for the unexpected visit, she got straight to the point. "You bastard. You almost got a man killed and now he's bedridden. You have to pay for his operation and return some of his business otherwise, or I'll sue you." She didn't have the breath to express her contempt and indignation. Everyone present at this scandal fell silent. We're watching to see what the boss would say. Would he personally kick out the uninvited guest or call the police? But Aiden just laughed in her face. "Sue me. That's a big statement. What can you do? It was a long time ago and it's not true." He smiled wickedly. "No one can prove it. No one. Especially not you, the daisy saleswoman." Aiden emphasized the last word to humiliate his wife. Emma ran out of the office in tears. She couldn't believe Aiden was such a low man. It turns out he had crippled his fellow man's fate and taken his business. And she, Emma, had something to do with it, too. Since all these years they'd been living on the money from that business. Dirty money. Tears covered her eyes. She couldn't see where she was going. Then someone grabbed her arm. Emma gasped in surprise and tried to pull away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just that I know something about your husband. You might be interested in it." Emma wasn't a fan of gossip, and in any other situation, she would have said it wasn't necessary. But now some force made her stop. "Let's step aside. It doesn't seem very comfortable to talk here," Emma suggested, looking at the woman who had so boldly stopped her. She looked unassuming. She looked more like a homeless person or a beggar, the kind you often see on the street. What can she tell me? Who is she anyway? Emma thought. But she decided to let her talk. "You see, I wasn't always like this." The stranger hesitated. "Well, I haven't always lived on the streets. I have a degree in economics. And a few years ago, I worked in a solid firm. And then one of the managers had a disaster. He became crippled. All the rights to run the business went to his partner, and he started eliminating old employees so there would be no witnesses. I was accused of stealing, but it wasn't my fault. With a reputation like that, I couldn't get a job. You know, who wants an unreliable economist? So I have to survive. I'm sorry, Emma said. But what does that have to do with my husband, she asked, though a sticky doubt was beginning to spread in her soul. Your husband is the man who slandered me, who took away my job, who ruined my life, she said bitterly, as if to reveal all the cards. But he doesn't know that I have dirt on him. The woman looked around fearfully, as if someone might have overheard their conversation. Why didn't you go to the police? Emma asked incredulously. Your husband is a wealthy man, and money solves many problems. He would have bought those documents and gotten away with it. The stranger added in a sad voice, and worried that Emma might leave, continued, I think you're a decent man. You have more opportunities. I'll give you these documents, and promise me you'll do me justice. I have no one else to turn to. It seemed to Emma that at the last words in the voice of the unhappy interlocutor already sounded tears. All right, I'll do my best, Emma replied, though she had no plan in her head, but she was determined to establish justice. Alex, I have an important conversation. I realize that there's no reason to trust me, but please listen to the end. Emma decided that she had to act, at least try to do something. Otherwise, she would never forgive herself. So she told about being in her husband's office, about how he ridiculed all her threats, and about the meeting with the tramp. Now I have documents to prove that the business was illegally obtained by my husband. We have to go to court, she finished. Despite the fact that his body did not obey the young man, his mind remained the same as before. Quickly analyzing the situation, he replied, but there's not much chance of winning the case. Although even if it's 1 in 1,000, it's worth a try. Except that in my position, it is difficult to appear in court. This answer did not surprise Emma, and she was ready for it. We could hire a good lawyer. All we need is to write a statement on your behalf. It's a deal, Alex concluded, and his eyes lit up with an excitement he hadn't seen in years. Iden paced around the apartment, waving papers. What are they counting on? I'm going to tear them apart. That cripple wants to take my firm away from me. Where can he go? The mother was watching her son, and her face showed worry. I warned you. You shouldn't relax. Your ex-wife is not as innocent as we thought. And if they have any proof, you said it was clean, but people don't go in empty-handed. I could tell Aiden was getting cold feet. He was used to things going smoothly lately, and now his secure life was threatened. I'm calling a lawyer, he informed his mother. They're not going to get away with this. Alex, buoyed by the hope that after all these years justice might prevail, couldn't lie still in bed. He remembered his old life, the way he used to be. He wanted to act, to make time, to make things happen that he couldn't even dream of. The phone next to the bed lit up. Nick reached for it and read the message. The young man's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Dad, Emma, come here quickly, Alex shouted. Dave and Emma rushed into the room. It seemed as if something incredible had happened, if that was what Alex was calling them. It was. Dad, I got a message that I've been approved for free surgery. It's scheduled for the 23rd. Dr. Johnson himself will be performing it. He's a luminary. He never fails. This is a chance to get back on my feet. Dave, barely holding back tears of happiness, as a man who had lived in the world long enough, didn't believe in miracles. But what his son was saying was a real miracle. Emma ran over to the bed and hugged Alex. When the first emotion subsided, she turned to him. The 23rd. and that's the day the trial is scheduled. What are you going to do? You can't be in two places at once. No, I can't. But I'm choosing surgery, you know. The chance to be my old self is worth more than all the money in the world and getting even with Aiden. I'm taking the surgery. It's non-negotiable. Well, then I'll represent you in court, Emma said, as if she wanted to show that she could be relied on. Okay, I'll make a power of attorney for you, Alex answered, smiling at the fact that fate had finally taken mercy on him and he had a reliable person. The closer the decisive day became, the more excitement enveloped everyone who lived in the small house, but each tried to keep his emotions under control and not to give away his anxiety in any way. On the morning of the 23rd, Dave and Emma decided to take Alex to the hospital first and then go to court. The staff at the clinic greeted them with a friendly welcome. Sorry for the inconvenience, but we have our own rules. No cell phones for patients. It's unnecessary. Right now, we need to focus solely on the surgery. And when it's over, we'll let you know so you can come check on the patient. That didn't seem like a strange condition. Emma was content to leave Alex there. Attention, court is in session. Emma saw her ex-spouse for the first time in weeks. This time he looked calm and even self-assured, like a man convinced of his impunity. She shifted her gaze to the lawyer. He remained completely calm and smiled slightly, showing her that everything would be all right. The session began. Emma was convinced that this lawyer had been recommended to her for a reason. He knew his case well, and with the documents she had provided, she had a good chance of winning. "We are adjourned," the judge announced. She turned to Dave and smiled at him. The older man was sitting in the far corner of the room, afraid to even move, as if that might spook their luck. Emma noticed Aiden heading toward her. "Are you glad you won?" The question was asked in the tone of a man who would do anything, even kill. But now Emma forbade herself to be afraid. "We're going to win this trial. I'm sure we will, and you'll get what you deserve," she said. Aiden suddenly smiled in a way that made her feel cold inside. He lowered his voice and said almost in a whisper, "Your good acquaintance is now in my hands with my men. I was the one who sent him the quota message. You naive, believed it, fell into the trap. Now listen carefully. You withdraw your lawsuit, and I release your Alex safe and sound. Everyone's happy and content, living like they used to. Otherwise, you'll never see him again." Finishing his speech, Aiden looked at Emma triumphantly and mercilessly. "You're lying." "It can't be," she said. Aiden pulled his phone out of his pocket and showed her the same message she had seen on Alex's phone. Only now it made sense why the so-called clinic staff had forbidden Alex to keep his phone. So now he was being held hostage. No surgery was out of the question. It was a well-constructed plan that they'd been easily lured into. And it was up to her now whether or not he stayed alive, and that Aiden was willing to do anything she no longer doubted. This was a very difficult decision. Emma turned toward her father. Dave had heard the whole conversation, though Aiden tried to keep his voice low. "Do it, daughter. Don't go along with this blackmail. We have to punish the bastard. He's waiting for us to surrender, but he won't." Dave's voice was so confident that she dismissed any doubts. Aiden, taking his seat, watched her and became concerned. He was sure the plan wouldn't go awry, that Emma would fear for her lover and stop the process, and she would choose to continue. That wasn't part of Aiden's plan. The lawyer was excellent, his every word hitting the mark, and Aiden's look grew more and more grim. Finally, the decisive moment had arrived. The court decided to grant Emma's petition to dissolve her marriage to Aiden. There was a whisper in the room. "I ask for silence. In view of all the evidence presented to the court, return ownership of the firm to Dave." Emma clasped her hands to her chest. It was a victory. Emotions overwhelmed her. She threw a glance at Dave, and he felt the same way. Aiden was dark with anger and hatred. He had lost. New circumstances had been revealed to the court. Therefore, Kolesnikov Aiden Valerievich is taken into custody, the judge announced. The detention of her ex-husband happened right in the courtroom. Emma could not even expect such a thing. "Thank you very much," she said to the lawyer. "You're a real professional." He smiled. "This is my job, and I try to do it well." Emma walked out of the courtroom with her arms around Dave. "We won." Won. Her ex-mother-in-law jumped out after her. "Did you make your choice? Your cripple is dead." But the lawyer was actually a professional. During the break, he managed to talk to the woman who provided the dirt. She followed Aiden and his mother and found out where they'd taken Alex. While a trial was going on in one end of town, an extraction team was working in the other. Alex, who was being held hostage, was safely rescued, and all the culprits went to the police. Contrary to Aiden's expectations, not everything in this world was corrupt, and everyone involved in this operation would have to answer to the full extent of the law. Emma prepared a celebratory dinner. There was a real feast in the small house. Alex was laughing. Dave glowed with joy, and Emma twirled little Joe around the room. "I have some important news to tell you," Alex said. "I now have the money to pay for the operation myself, and I have already chosen a reliable clinic and arranged the dates. I don't want to delay. I've already lost too much time." Emma clapped her hands in approval of his decision. "And I also want to make a solemn proposal. Emma, marry me. I can't imagine life without you and Joe. I love you so much. Be my wife." Everyone looked at Emma, waiting to see what she would say. "I do," she said, and leaned over to kiss her future husband. The operation was successful, and the wedding was celebrated in a small circle of the closest people. It seemed that fate had decided to compensate for all its failures and reward Emma and Alex. "I'm so happy," Emma said, looking at her husband and his shining eyes. Alex replied that he felt the same way. "And I have a surprise for you," he said, and smiled enigmatically. "I'm ready to give you flowers every day, never getting tired. I know how you love them. But I'd rather give you a flower pavilion, so that you could be its owner and give people flowers. Enjoy yourself." And that was the best gift Emma had ever dreamed of. A few weeks passed. She diligently trimmed the stem tips of the scarlet roses, building a composition of incredible beauty. The door to her pavilion opened and a crying woman appeared on the threshold. Emma recognized her visitor as the same Mealy who had so brazenly shown up at her birthday party and caused the rift. "What did you want?" Emma asked tactfully. She hadn't expected her to have the courage to show up like that, but people never ceased to amaze her with their tactlessness. "Please don't kick me out. I have nowhere else to go. And don't try to punish me. Life has already done everything for you. I saw an ad saying you needed a salesman, and I really need a job." Emma looked at Mealy not harshly, but with pity. She looked miserable, broken. How much had she had to go through to change like that? "I found out I'm pregnant. I'm having twins," Mealy continued, tears starting to roll from her eyes again. "And Aiden, is in jail. I don't have anything to live on right now. And what will happen to my babies when they come into the world? Please give me a job. I really need it." Emma didn't see this coming. Perhaps another woman would have relished the opportunity to take revenge on her rival, but not her. "I come in. I haven't held a grudge against you in a long time. You might even say I'm grateful." Mealy stopped crying and raised her eyes in surprise, looking at Emma. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Well, if it weren't for you, I would never have met the man I'm truly happy with. Emma continued. Consider yourself employed with full benefits. You can take sick leave and maternity leave. Everything will be compensated. Who knows, maybe we'll become friends too. Now we'll have common interests, flowers and children. And Emma smiled. It felt light and good. She was not the kind of person who could look indifferently at other people's grief. As if deciding to test her once again, fate had sent this meeting with Millie. And Emma passed the test with flying colors. After accidentally seeing his ex-fiancée at a wedding, Ajay decided to humiliate her once again. But Ajay walked briskly through the night streets of the city where his childhood and youth had passed. His heart was beating in his chest like a bird in a cage. The smallest multicolored blots flashed before his eyes. The man's breathing was ragged, but he hardly felt it. Rather to be away from the restaurant, where such a surprise awaited him. After all, this trip was going to be pleasant, easy. Edward's childhood friend had invited EJ to the wedding. The man was surprised. He had long considered his friend a hardened bachelor. And here it was, a wedding. EJ was curious to see the woman who had conquered his free-spirited comrade. To meet his youthful friends again, to see his hometown, to remember the past. Of course, EJ could not refuse such an opportunity, at least some bright and warm event in a series of gray everyday life. The man even took an unscheduled week's vacation at work for this meeting with old friends. Ajay was a more than successful man, but how much he had accomplished, living and working in a big city, managed to escape from a provincial town. They don't know that EJ has been working for many years on an ordinary position in not the most successful company, and every day spends at least 4 hours to get to and from work, because he lives far from the office, almost on the outskirts of the city, in a far from prestigious neighborhood. His cramped 2-bedroom apartment has been in need of renovation for a long time. But EJ doesn't want to start this epic. Why should he? It will do. Lives alone, only sleeps at home. Why would a single bachelor need all this beauty? And he needs a lot of money. A man can't afford to pay a lot of money for repairs. His salary is not that absolutely beggarly, but excesses and luxury certainly does not assume. With a personal life also somehow does not add up. There are, of course, sometimes some romances, but it's not serious. Mostly ladies who have nowhere to live flock to Ajay. At his expense, they want to save on rent for the first time, until they get a foothold in the city. Ajay can see the intentions of these women. It's readable in their looks, their words, their actions. Unpleasant, of course, but perhaps by the age of 35, it is time to finally realize that pure, bright love does not exist. Everyone in a relationship pursues their own goals and interests. It seemed in my youth that someday I would meet the perfect girl. Beautiful, loving, intelligent, sincere, certainly household and caring, like a mother and grandmother. On the one hand, self-sufficient, able to occupy herself while her husband is out with friends. On the other hand, adoring her husband and ready to be his reliable rear. It is with her, with this smiling beauty, EJ and build a family, and they will live happily ever after. Remembering those dreams, the man was amazed at how stupid and naive he was. There are no such women, there are no such relationships, and in general, there is no such thing that in life you are completely satisfied with everything. This realization came gradually. Disappointments were waiting at every step: work, personal life, everyday life. How many plans and hopes did AJ have for the big city? When he was young, it seemed to him that he should leave his hometown and settle in the capital, and life would be brightly colored. Beautiful girls, great opportunities, lucrative job offers, nightclubs, fun parties, new friends. That's not how it works. A small 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, cramped, in an old house and remote from civilization area. But even for these chalates, Ajay still hasn't paid off. The family, of course, helped with the down payment, and helped well. With this amount of money, EJ could buy a huge apartment in his hometown and make luxurious repairs there. But in the big city, it was only a fraction of the cost of a dilapidated apartment on the top floor of a 5-story building. Ajay was not discouraged. Then he was still full of plans and hopes and felt happy. Finally breaking out, that's exactly how the guy felt. Now everything would go right. Freedom strengthened the prospects, made his head spin. Ajay was glad that he had managed to end his past life. It seemed to him that it was a prerequisite for starting a new life, like a rebirth. Ajay left his mom, grandparents, friends, and Lexi behind in his hometown. His relationship with her was starting to take a turn for the overly serious. It was scaring AJ. She was certainly a good girl, pretty modest, caring, but the strength of her feelings scared the guy. And anyway, how many more of these years did he have ahead of him? Not to take her with him to the big city, in Tula with his samovar do not go. In the end, Ajay quickly found a job. There were indeed many offers, but they were not as tempting as he had imagined at home. Nevertheless, EJ was not discouraged. He needed money to live and pay the mortgage. Besides, it is necessary to gain experience somewhere. Everything is still ahead of him, except that more than 10 years have passed and nothing has changed dramatically. EJ still worked at low-paying jobs. You need connections or talent to move up the ladder. Then there's the incredible work ethic, the love of work, the passion. Ajay had none of those things. He served his working hours in the office as a duty, received a salary at the end of the month, most of which he gave to mandatory payments, rent, loans, mortgage. The rest he stretched until the next paycheck. EJ always liked beautiful girls, bright as stars with long, slender legs, shining huge eyes, self-confident, witty, ambitious. There were many of them in the big city, of course, but they were not attracted to AJ at all. How could a young beauty be attracted by a dull office plankton, living from paycheck to paycheck? What could he offer such girls? In his own town, Ajay had once been an enviable groom, grandson of the head doctor of the local hospital, a student at a prestigious university. There the boy felt like the best of the best. He had a lot of friends. Girls were looking at him. But Ajay always dreamed of more. He dreamed of New York, believed that he was worthy of a much better and brighter life than the one he had in his native Jackson. EJ often spoke contemptuously of life in the provinces, calling his small homeland a backwater and a hole. He said he'd never stay here, but he didn't. What's the use? What did he accomplish? And there's no going back. First of all, AJ, during the years of his life in the capital, has managed to acquire debts in the form of loans. It's going to take him a long time to pay them off. And the salary in New York is still much higher than in Jackson. EJ realized that if he returned home, he would not get out of debt. And there's no one to help him now. His grandfather used to be in business. A respected and well-known man in the city, head doctor of the local hospital, but now he is on a well-deserved vacation. Sick, old, weak grandfather himself requires attention and care. And secondly, well, how can it is possible to return after EJ assured his friends that life in the slums is not for him? After the contemptuous words in the address of the small motherland, okay, let's be honest, bragging to his friends, to admit to the whole city his failure and inadequacy, to sign in his own insignificance. But no, Ajay couldn't do that. Especially in the eyes of his old friends and relatives. Ajay was quite a successful and established guy. He lives in New York in his own apartment, works as an economist. The man diligently created an image of a man who was very satisfied with his life. Even in social networks, he exhibited photos that, in his opinion, supported the status of a prosperous New Yorker. Funny, of course, but sometimes the owner of the company, where he worked, EJ organized for employees corporate parties. And on EJ's page after such festivities appeared photos from luxurious restaurants. Once, a colleague of EJ came to work in an expensive foreign car, rented a used car from his brother. EJ took selfies behind the wheel of the car and posted the photo on his profile that evening. EJ laughed at himself. And yet, so on and on it went. EJ was giving the appearance of a life on his page that he never had. And he was getting tons of likes and comments from people he knew from Jackson. They were convinced that EJ had it all worked out. The ambitious plans of his youth had come to fruition, and EJ was fine with that. At least in the minds of his friends and relatives, he would be so successful and happy. EJ grew up without a father. His mother gave birth to him, as they call it, for herself. Or to put it more simply and honestly, she took a whore. EJ was the fruit of a banal resort romance of a student, a high school student, and a young man who introduced himself as the owner of a small business. Who his father really was, EJ didn't know, and believed that now he would never know. The man didn't even know his son existed and had probably forgotten about the affair that had happened so many years ago. Or maybe he was gone altogether. It's not a big deal. Mother, she knew nothing about her resort lover. It's just that her mother didn't plan a serious relationship with him. That's why she repeatedly learned the details of his life. Address and passport data certainly did not ask. Just wanted to have fun, being away from controlling and tutelage strict parents. And in the end, that's how it turned out. EJ was an unplanned but beloved child. His grandparents insisted that their daughter give birth after all, though she seemed to want an abortion at first. EJ suspected that it was his grandfather who had kept him alive. Grandfather is so authoritative, reliable, correct, and it is very difficult to argue with him. It must have been hard for him to accept the fact that his daughter had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And yet the grandfather coped with himself and even made such an important decision for the whole family. The grandfather's reward was a grandson. He had dreamed of a son all his life, but in the end he raised 2 daughters. The older of them gave her father 2 wonderful granddaughters, but the younger one made the most pleasant and long-awaited surprise, finally gave birth to a boy. E.J.'s childhood was bright and happy. He was surrounded by loving relatives. His mother, however, did not pay much attention to her son. She was working or trying to organize her personal life. But EJ still felt her love. His mother often gave him toys, took him to amusement rides or to the movies. She was a people pleaser, cheerful, energetic, full of ideas and plans. His mother charged her son with optimism and love of life, and his grandparents, they did not give a damn. EJ later realized that his grandmother was very sorry for him. After all, how can a boy grow up without a father? And his mother is not particularly engaged with him. He would appear like a ray of light and then disappear again. Therefore, the grandmother tried to compensate for the lack of parental warmth grandson and cooked for him delicious dishes and bedtime stories he read, and walked with his grandson for hours around the city, patiently going around with him all the playgrounds. A grandmother is warmth, unconditional love, and complete acceptance. No matter what EJ did, she was always at his side. Even if her favorite grandchild turned out to be guilty of something. If EJ was involved in a fight, grandmother unreservedly considered the other party as a scumbag bully who dared to hurt a good boy. If her grandson got a D, grandma would turn on the teacher for her prejudice. EJ loved his grandmother too. It was nice to know that there was someone in the world for whom you were the light in the window, the best, most beautiful, and smartest. EJ had a different relationship with his grandfather. He did not particularly encourage dabbling, could shout at his grandson, and even spank him when his wife wailed. Grandfather set limits, and that was good too, because it paradoxically made EJ feel safe. Grandfather was as dependable as a rock. His words carried weight. He often had heart-to-heart talks with his grandson on a variety of topics: friendship, love, studies, life plans. Grandfather had been having such conversations with EJ, his boy, since he was a young boy. EJ adored these moments with his grandfather, and the grandfather often took his grandson with him to work. There the boy saw the respect with which other people treated his grandfather and felt proud of his relative. EJ realized that his grandfather was doing a very important job and doing it well. People were grateful to him. The grandfather took his grandson fishing and to the woods, and sometimes they spent the whole day in the garage, figuring out the insides of his grandfather's old car. Ajay suspected that his grandfather could have bought a newer car, but apparently the faithful iron horse was dear to him as a memory. The older relative tried to compensate for his father's lack of attention as best he could, and he did it well. EJ adored his grandfather, and as a child he dreamed of being like him. When EJ was about 6 years old, he saw a famous rock band on TV for the first time, and the boy was so mesmerized by this spectacle that he did not even hear his grandmother calling him to lunch. From then on, the boy never parted with the plastic shovel. He held it like a guitar and sang and danced just like the guys on TV. The adults laughed and clapped their hands. They were sure Ajay would outgrow his hobby. He didn't. At first the boy just listened to rock songs. Then he started singing along. The grandmother was the first to notice that her grandson has hearing and voice, and took him to a music school. Within these walls, EJ was disappointed. He had imagined everything quite differently. He thought the school had a stage and men in jeans with guitars. But the kid was put at the piano and forced to learn boring scales. It was unbearable. Ajay hated school after the first 2 or 3 lessons. But grandmother, always soft and supple, suddenly showed firmness. She was determined to make a musician out of her grandson, as his teacher assured her that the boy had talent and that E.J.'s sense of rhythm was innate. It turned out that his ear is amazing. But laziness, according to the teacher, spoiled everything. His grandmother did not want to ruin Ajay's talent, so she made him go to the hated music school for 3 years. And then the boy still dropped out, and not without the support of his grandfather, left the dismal institution. His grandmother regretted his action for a long time. She had already seen her grandson in dreams on posters announcing the arrival of the great pianist. But EJ was not like that at all stagey. The wise grandfather, who saw and understood everything, gave his grandson a real, beautiful guitar for the new year. And EJ somehow slowly learned to pick up melodies, something he looked up from his favorite performers, to what he reached himself. And he studied hard with self-tutorials. The boy was happy. He liked this kind of study without annoying instructions, unnecessary lessons like solfeggio and literature, compulsory in exams. Now the boy spent hours in his room, selecting compositions. And it worked. His father must have been musical, his grandmother sometimes said. A bear stepped on everyone's ear in our family. But this one is a talent. You can see it in him. EJ liked to imagine that his father was one of those rock musicians who packed million-dollar stadiums. He even looked for similarities between himself and the popular rock stars of the time. And he found it. He managed to find it. At school, EJ studied not that very well, but without failures. His mother and grandmother at first dreamed that he would follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become a doctor. But by middle school, it became clear the boy does not have the necessary aptitudes and abilities. Grandfather did not worry about it at all. He believed that everyone has his own way. And the task of adult relatives is to help the child to determine the future, to recognize his talent, which can later turn into a profession. None of the adults took his guitar playing seriously. That's why one day at the family council it was decided that EJ would become a student of an economic university. Why? The profession is promising, monetary, just the right thing for a guy. Ajay didn't mind, simply because he himself had no ambitions and plans for the future. Economist as an economist sounded good. It was better to study at university than to go to the army. And in general, student life seemed to EJ something like a never-ending holiday, a party. New friends and girlfriends. I can't wait. EJ liked it at the university. There seemed to be less control right away. It seemed that all his relatives suddenly recognized his only grandson and son as an adult. Grandfather even began to give more money for pocket money. It was beautiful. Everything was exactly as Ajay had imagined. Parties, hanging out in rented apartments with visiting students, going to nightclubs. That's where the guy's guitar skills came in handy. It was great to sit in someone's kitchen and sing funny or even hooligan songs. EJ, the guitarist, was always the center of attention and was very proud of himself. Girls started to look at him, a good-looking, cheerful guy from a good family. At school, EJ was somehow not distinguished by popularity, but at university he suddenly became an enviable groom. Of course, the guy took full advantage of this, had affairs, enjoyed his youth and freedom. One day, walking through the night city, a group of friends led by EJ was in a rock bar. The guy had no idea that there was such an institution in Houston. The bar was located in the basement of one of the houses in the center of the city. Unremarkable sign, minimal advertising. But inside it was a treasure. Several not too spacious, cozy rooms with soft, comfortable chairs and photos of rock musicians. On the walls, a long stand with high chairs and a stage with a microphone in the largest of the halls. Local musicians and bands and soloists performed there every night. They played and sang both well-known songs and compositions of their own composition. Some kind of special atmosphere reigned here. The old-timers of the bar seemed to have known each other for a long time and formed a single coherent organism. AJ immediately wanted to become a part of it. It was the very element he dreamed of plunging into. From then on, Ajay became a regular at the bar. He watched the musicians' performances with bated breath and then applauded them so that his palms burned. The guy sang along with the soloists, sometimes even dancing. That's how it goes. Gradually, Ajay became his own man in the bar. He got to know the musicians. Sometimes they even let him on stage between acts. Ajay played for the bar patrons and felt a wave of energy coming from the audience. It was great. The guy was trying to be part of a band. He'd met a lot of people here now. To play concerts as a member of a rock band, this was E.J.'s dream since his early years, but there were no offers of cooperation. And when EJ tried to offer his services, he was rejected very carefully and gently, trying not to offend. Ajay lacked something to realize his dream. Maybe charisma? Maybe charisma? Maybe talent, or both? He had to put up with it, but rock musicians were still idols and celestials for the guy. He liked to rotate in this environment, to listen to their conversations, to help them with performances. It was in this rock bar that AJ met Lexi. He still remembered that night. It was the end of May, time for university credits. AJ, as always, was having a hard time getting out of the trouble he'd gotten himself into. By habit, the guy did not spend the whole semester studying, and on the eve of the session he realized that he had to learn something, pay for something, and work off some credits. Like today, the teacher of economic theory agreed to give the negligent student admission to the session if he would repair his classroom. Ajay spent the whole day on this alone. His legs and back ached from the unusual physical work, but now he had the teacher's signature on his transcript. Ajay decided to visit his favorite rock bar after a hard day. Ajay showed up at the rock bar alone. The buddies were all busy. Someone went on a date with a girl because it was Friday, and someone was diligently preparing for another credit. No problem. Ajay had a lot of acquaintances in the rock bar, so he wouldn't be bored. And indeed, before he entered, he was already called by Andrew, a regular here. He was sitting with a couple of friends in the corner of the room at a table. Ajay gladly joined them. Joking, talking about life-friendly conversation was going along until Lexi appeared in the room. The short, thin girl was dressed in a waitress uniform, black short shorts, a black t-shirt, a long gray apron, and a name tag on her chest. Her long brown hair was gathered into a high ponytail. There was a minimum of makeup on her face, but this girl didn't need it. Nature herself painted her face with bright colors, black eyebrows, long black eyelashes, beautiful peachy skin, and huge eyes of some unreal light turquoise color. This unusual combination of colors attracted EJ's attention. And this is a new waitress. She just started her first shift yesterday, said Andrew, following his friend's gaze. Cute. I agree, but I like Janie better. Too bad she quit. Ajay nodded absent-mindedly at Andrew's words. All his attention was on the new waitress. He couldn't figure out what attracted him to her. Well, yes, pretty, but at the university he met prettier girls. This one was too skinny. Edward used to say, nothing to hold on to, but Ajay couldn't take his eyes off her. Then he realized. He was captivated by her smile, dazzling and yet modest and warm. It seemed to light up the girl's face, making it even more attractive. EJ wanted to see that smile all the time. Moreover, the guy dreamed of being the one who caused it, this smile. It was a strange feeling. It had never happened to him before. They were silent at first, and it wasn't a tense, oppressive silence, but relaxed and calm. Neither Lexi nor Ajay felt a shadow of embarrassment or awkwardness. Then all of a sudden, both of them were talking. First, they discussed the previous night and the performance of a local rock band made up of yesterday's high school students. Lexi and Ajay agreed that the guys had a great future ahead of them if they kept it up. Finally, Ajay ventured into a more candid conversation. What about you? Do you have someone in your life? No, I'm single. Lexi quickly replied. What about you? Ajay couldn't answer that question unequivocally. He always had someone. Right now he was kind of dating Katie, a girl from the parallel group. They had gone on a couple dates already, but for Lexi's sake he would easily give up all the others. This girl was attracting him more and more. Ajay asked the girl to tell him about herself. He wanted to know more about this mysterious beauty who made such a strong impression on him. Ajay was experiencing previously unexplored feelings. It was both gratifying and confusing. Lexi talked about her life simply and sincerely. Ajay listened attentively, eagerly catching every word she said. Her manner of speech, her calm, gentle timbre, her facial expressions, he liked everything about this girl, absolutely everything. He didn't want to part with her at all. He hoped that the road to her house would be very long. It turned out that Lexi was born and raised in the countryside. Her ancestral home is almost 100 kilometers from Haxton. It's a cozy and quiet place, but completely unsuited for the life of young people, like most of her friends' buddies. Lexi, having finished 9 grades, went to seek happiness in the nearest city. The girl entered a teacher's college. The profession of a teacher of junior high school, she chose it not on the dictates of the heart, just somewhere it was necessary to enter. The girl studied, got a diploma, but she could not work in her profession. She ran away after a couple of months of employment. I realized that pedagogy is not my thing, Lexi admitted. Lexi shared her memories. I could not convey to these little people how to solve examples or write essays. I know how to do it all perfectly well myself, but I couldn't teach and interest the kids. It is one thing to study in college, and another thing to practice. It's heaven and earth. I did not want to take on such responsibility, afraid to let the children go, to discourage their desire to learn, and I quit. Then I worked for a while in a private developmental center. A young, pretty girl with a pedagogical education was welcomed with open arms. It was quite different from school. Here it was not so scary to make a mistake or fail. And I myself have always liked to mess around with kids. But then the center went bankrupt and closed. I found myself on the street. I saw an ad for a waitress in a bar, so I answered it. I'm so glad your center closed, Ajay said. I mean, if it wasn't for that, we never would have met. Ajay and Lexi started dating. The quiet, modest Lexi with her dazzling smile and short stare finally won the young man's heart. And she herself, Ajay, saw it, felt it, sensed it. Lexi loved him with all her heart, with all her soul. She did everything to make Ajay feel happy around her, even to the detriment of his desires and leisure. Ajay moved into Lexi's rented apartment very quickly. They started living together. AJ's relatives weren't too happy about this fact. But what could they do? AJ was a very mature guy. What he wanted to do, he did. AJ was finishing up his degree at the university. Lexi was still working as a waitress. Her salary, his scholarship, plus monthly financial support from relatives, the young people had enough money. AJ was resting his soul next to Lexi. He felt that this girl accepted him with all his shortcomings. Moreover, she even liked these disadvantages, seeing them, paradoxically, as pluses. What eyes did Lexi look at him with? With what attention she caught his every word. And how many compliments EJ received when he played guitar for his girlfriend or sang to her. Next to Lexi, AJ felt like someone incredibly needed, important, successful, almost perfect. It felt really good. And then AJ didn't understand why, but everything started to change. Not at once, slowly, gradually. At first, Lexi's concerns stopped warming his soul. AJ had somehow gotten used to her adoration and attention. Lexi made him his favorite toast for breakfast, tried to please him with something special for dinner. And it came out that the guy started to take it all for granted. Lexi no longer evoked the same feelings in him. The admiration, the interest, it was all gone. At first, Lexi seemed a mystery to AJ, so beautiful, quiet, modest. But the eyes gave away a bright nature, an exciting combination. But over time, the guy found out that there was nothing special about Lexi, an ordinary girl, even a little boring. And AJ had always been attracted to unconventional personalities. He feared mediocrity, grayness, ordinariness. He even had his own idol, Andrew Kalin. He was 10 years older than AJ. By the way, at one time, Andrew graduated from the same school where EJ studied. But to enter the vocational school, where most of those who failed, in those years, the guy did not. He formed his own band and rushed to New York. There, Kalin made a dizzying career. No, he did not become a star of the first magnitude, but still gained some fame. Songs of his rock band played on the radio. The musicians gave concerts across the country and even had their own army of fans. Kalin possessed a sharp mind and mad charisma. AJ knew him personally. Andrew often visited AJ's house. His parents lived here. And every time he came to the rock bar, where he was always a dear guest, talking to old friends, listening to local musicians. Kalin, everyone here knew him and loved him. AJ considered himself a fan of his in general. He liked everything about the man, his open smile, his way of talking, his firm gaze. Kalin had amazing eyes, sad and thoughtful. It seemed that Andrew saw through every person with those eyes. EJ wanted to be like Andrew. He even tried to imitate him, but quickly realized that he could not. Kalin was a peace product, a star, a soloist, a leader. It was Lexi's shift that night. EJ had also stopped by the bar to meet some friends and listen to a new rock band. According to the stories of people he knew, the newcomers were showing promise. The evening went on as usual. Toward midnight, AJ suddenly felt some excitement. Turning around, he saw him, Kalin, in the company of several buddies. Andrew was walking to his favorite table, nodding politely to his acquaintances. AJ rejoiced. What a stroke of luck. There would definitely be no boredom here tonight. Kalin was a man of celebration, and EJ would be sure to socialize with him this evening. Only later, when the time is right. In the back of his mind, the boy still cherished the hope that Andrew would someday help him get him on stage, or put in a good word for him. He's a powerful man, after all. He has so many connections, so many acquaintances. Maybe Kalin will even get him in his band someday, even if not in the main squad, just as a backup. Andrew lived exactly the life that AJ dreamed of: tours, performances, rehearsals, parties, communication with interesting people, beautiful girls, and most importantly, the stage. Andrew gathered stadiums, turned on crowds of people. He sang along. Thousands of eyes looked at him with admiration. Isn't that happiness? EJ seemed to have realized by the last year of university that he would not make a rock musician. And it's probably too late to start at that age. But seeing Andrew, the guy every time again remembered his dream. In his soul awoke hope. Andrew, he's a risk taker. After school did not go to study further, put everything on the career of a musician. And he didn't fail. It's a pity that EJ did not have the courage for such a step. Back in the day, Colin's table was served by Lexi. She smiled at Andrew, as she did at all the customers. He would look at her, and occasionally say a word or two to Lexi. Ajay didn't hear those phrases, but judging by the look on Lexi's face, it was something pleasant. To his surprise, Ajay suddenly realized that he didn't like seeing his girlfriend being nice to Andrew. And this was clearly not about jealousy. No, AJ realized that Kaylin was surrounded by beauties of all sorts, ready to do anything for him. Why would he want to hick Lexi? Yeah, hick. Now that he'd been living with her for a few months, Ajay could see that there was nothing special about her looks. The guy himself didn't know what it was about her that had gotten to him back then. EJ was uncomfortable with the fact that he wasn't the one chatting sweetly with the star. He has to patiently wait for the right moment. And Lexi is quietly talking to Andrew right now and doing it so casually and naturally, as if she doesn't realize who's in front of her. Or maybe she really doesn't. A few more hours passed. EJ decided that it was time to talk to his idol and headed to his table. At the same moment, Lexi rushed over to Kaylin with her order, and she swooped her tray at AJ. No, Lexi held the glasses with beer. Nothing even spilled out of them. The girl's good reaction saved the situation. But AJ still couldn't resist an irritated retort. An elephant in a china shop, the expression came out of his mouth automatically, the same words his mother used to bail out on AJ when he dropped or broke something. Lexi was embarrassed. She felt bad that AJ was emphasizing her slip-up to those present. If it wasn't for his caustic remarks, no one would have noticed anything. Well, why would you do that, Lexi? Kaylin smiled encouragingly. What kind of elephant is it? It's a very sweet and fragile young lady. Ajay looked angrily at Lexi. After those words from Andrew, she suddenly irritated him even more. The girl, sensing this, retreated. The rest of the evening went great. EJ had a great time in the company of Andrew and his buddies. It was interesting to listen to their stories about their turbulent youth and concerts in the capital. What kind of trouble did they get into in their time? A whole movie could be made. EJ liked to feel himself a part of this company, even if only for one evening. These people lived bright, loud, and laughed heartily. Lexi's shift was over. She walked over to Ajay, calling him home. Usually they always came home from the bar together. He just waved her off. He wasn't interested in her right now. Is that your girlfriend? Andrew asked. More like a groupie, Ajay answered without caring about Lexi's feelings. And she was standing right next to him and heard everything. But the guy didn't care at the time. He didn't want Kaylin to find out that AJ was in a serious relationship with a hick and a waitress. You're lucky. I wish I had a groupie like that, Andrew said, winking at Lexi. She smiled sadly and went to the staff room to change. She was already very tired and wanted to get home as soon as possible. Ajay showed up at the apartment where he had been living with Lexi for a few months now. Early in the morning, he thought Lexi was going to give him a scandal. Well, or at least demand an explanation. Still, he'd been very naughty to her. He called her an elephant and didn't admit to the others that she was his girlfriend. But Lexi looked kind of guilty herself. She hadn't said a word to Ajay, and then when he spoke up, she acted like nothing had happened. Looking at the guy with the same love, tenderness as before, and caring for him as well. Lexi's admiration and attention, which used to be seen as a gift of fate, now irritated AJ. What had recently seemed to be the girl's virtues had turned into her flaws. Not care, but obsession. Not natural beauty, but provincial simplicity. Not modesty, but stiffness. And yet, Ajay was in no hurry to part with Lexi. She was comfortable with Ajay. Lexi provided him with a place to live, cooked delicious meals, even ironed his shirts. And yet she didn't control his every move like his relatives did. She didn't demand reports, didn't limit him, didn't blow his mind with talk about the future. With her, Ajay lived much freer than in his native house with his grandmother, grandfather, and mother. But EJ dreamed of more. He saw himself as a successful, established New Yorker. A bright girl with a model appearance, not Lexi from the province, should be next to such a person. The guy was looking forward to graduating from university, to move finally to the capital and start a new life. He didn't see Lexi around him. She was just a stopover, nothing more. But Ajay's plans were almost ruined by a ridiculous accident. "We need to have a serious talk," those were the words Lexi had used to greet AJ from the university one day. He had just sat through 5 consecutive classes. Consequently, he had neither the energy nor the desire to talk to the girl, but she showed an uncharacteristic persistence. Okay, Ajay sighed. He realized that he had no way out. "I'm expecting a baby." Lexi lowered her gaze. She was obviously feeling very embarrassed. Ajay felt like he'd been splashed with cold water. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "What's there to understand? It's simple. I'm expecting a baby." "Are you sure about that?" Ajay asked with hope in his voice. "It can't be any more certain than that." "That's a twist. What about New York? What about AJ's plans and dreams?" Now it's all over. AJ tried to talk Lexi into terminating the pregnancy. He told her it was too soon for them to be parents. A baby needs a grown-up mom and dad, and they're almost kids. "I'm not ready," the kid was honest. "What kind of father am I? I haven't even finished university yet." "I get it," Lexi sighed heavily. "You don't have to worry. I'll raise him on my own." The girl looked so unhappy, so confused. And how could she be alone? AJ knew full well that Lexi couldn't handle it. Likewise, Ajay knew he wouldn't leave her now, or rather he wouldn't abandon his child. Ever since he was a child, he had heard unflattering things about his own father. This man could not have known of his son's existence at all, and still turned out to be a scoundrel for not taking part in his upbringing. Grandfather, mother, grandmother, all together they managed to firmly hammer into EJ's head a simple rule: you cannot abandon their children under any circumstances. Anyone who does so is unworthy of respect, love, and a happy life. It is the gravest sin a man can commit. And now EJ finds himself in almost the same situation as his father once was. He is pregnant with a girl with whom he was just having fun, not planning a serious relationship. Only unlike his dad, EJ won't be able to disappear into the vast expanse of his immense homeland, and he won't be able to escape the consequences. No, of course Lexi won't go after him. She's not lying when she says she's going to raise the baby alone. But Ajay's conscience won't allow him to remove himself from the situation. "Well then, we'll get ready for the wedding." Ajay sighed and forced a semblance of a smile. "Well, I guess we'll just have to adapt to the new circumstances." Come to think of it, Lexi wasn't the only one to blame for this situation. Ajay had a part in it as well. Lexi is certainly not the limit of his dreams, but she's a good person to live with. She's homemaker, quiet, caring. She'd probably be a good mom, too. And New York? It can wait. It's not going anywhere. Ajay's going to get his way. The boy honestly tried to cheer himself up with those thoughts. So what if it's a baby? The main thing is that it should be born in marriage. Decency will be observed. And then you can get a divorce and realize the old plans. True, you'll have to pay alimony for 18 years, but that's no problem. EJ would have such an income that these obligatory deductions would not do him any good. Lexi hugged Ajay, snuggled up to him. "I knew you were reliable and that you could be trusted," she said. Before, Lexi's confession might have filled Ajay with energy and joy, but now she seemed like an obstacle, a stone around his neck, a problem. So he remained silent. Ajay introduced Lexi to his relatives. How could he not? The wedding was coming up. She won their hearts right away. Her grandmother was especially excited. She tirelessly praised her grandson's bride and said that Ajay was lucky to meet such a girl. Preparations for the wedding began. Lexi looked so happy, so excited. Her cheerful look annoyed Ajay, and talking about the upcoming celebration pissed him off. Everyone around him was rejoicing, but he felt like a trapped animal. All his plans had gone to shit because of her, because of Lexi. Here it is, the long-awaited and cherished diploma in his pocket already. The defense was perfect. Now would be a good time to get on a plane and go to New York, start a new life. And here it was, the wedding, Lexi's glowing face, the baby. Lexi was still working at the bar. Ajay, on the other hand, decided to take a vacation after a tough finish line. First credits, then exams, then a diploma. He would have time to work on it. There are times ahead when Lexi will be on maternity leave and he, Ajay, will have to support his family. So he was entitled to a little rest before this race. More and more often now, Ajay went to the rock bar to sit with his friends and have a beer or two. He looked with envious eyes at the young and not so young musicians performing on the stage. Some of them would stay in this small godforsaken town. Some of them had a great future ahead of them. Looking at these people, Ajay began to realize that he had done wrong with his life. A man is born and lives only once. He has no time for the unloved that goes for people and things. But commitments held Ajay like a snare. He wanted to howl at the moon at such a life and prospects. His friends had no idea. They thought that Ajay was just a little nervous about getting married and having a baby. That's just a normal thing. But Ajay didn't try to dissuade them. He was suffering alone and desperately hoped that things could still catch up. Not now, but later in a couple years. His plans weren't overturned, just put on hold for the time being, just so long as this swamp didn't swallow him up. One such night at the bar, when Lexi was staying home and Ajay was enjoying some freedom, he met Janie, a tall, dazzlingly beautiful girl. Long hair in loose waves down to her waist, tight jeans revealing a flat stomach. Top. She showed up surrounded by her girlfriends. They were pretty girls too, but all their virtues paled in comparison to Janie's beauty. Ajay hadn't taken his eyes off her from the moment she entered the hall. He wasn't the only one. By the way, his friends had already left, and Ajay was still sitting at the table, sipping his beer and watching. He liked everything about her, her smile, her loud laughter, her gestures. Janie was clearly a leader among her friends, and in general she behaved like a leader in life. She caught Ajay's eye a couple of times, and then a small miracle happened. She invited him to her table. Most of her friends had already dispersed by then. Two silent girls remained, who did not interfere in any way with the conversation between Janie and Ajay. In the course of the conversation, it became clear that the young people had a lot in common. Janie was a couple years younger than Ajay, and had also been raised without a father. Her grandmother and mother insisted that the girl should go to the law school of the local university after school. And Janie herself, as long as she could remember, dreamed of becoming an actress. She was attracted to the stage, creative environment, metropolitan life. "You're really going to be a great actress," Ajay assured her sincerely. "With such a stunning appearance. Yes, for you directors will arrange fights." "Thank you." Janie smiled without embarrassment. "I think so too, but I wasn't ready to argue with my mother and grandmother at that age. Not like I am now. At first I listened to my older relatives, and then, as I got older and stronger, I said I was an adult, and I wouldn't let them manipulate me and control my life anymore," Janie said. "Anyway, today I withdrew my documents from the university. I'm not going back. In a couple of days I'll take the train and go to New York forever. Even if I don't become an actress, I'm not coming back here." Ajay looked at the girl with admiration. How wonderful she was. Janie, unlike him, did not betray her dream, despite external pressure. She wasn't afraid to leave the university and go to New York into the unknown. In that, she's like the heroine of the movie. And Janie is bound to win, with such looks, character, and assertiveness. Next to this girl, AJ suddenly seemed worthless and cowardly. But it didn't last long, because Janie suddenly kissed AJ. He was dizzy with surprise. Was this for real? Such an amazing girl liked him? "You're awesome," Janie informed EJ, pulling back a little. Her huge brown eyes were like two dark pools in which one could so easily drown. "Why don't you keep me company? Come with me to New York. You're feeling a little cramped in this city, too. It'll be easier on the two of us." Ajay was dumbfounded and stared at his beautiful companion. She felt him so subtly, understood everything about him at once. "It's amazing." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "I'm with you." As he said it, AJ honestly thought he could handle Lexi in the wedding. He'd figure something out later. Well, he couldn't say no to such an amazing girl. Maybe AJ would never meet someone like that again. For sure. Because there's definitely no one else like her. That night, AJ left the rock bar with Janie. She was driving her own old foreign car that her grandfather had given her for going to law school. Janie drove the car admirably beautifully. Ajay admired her confident movements and slim profile the whole way. Then they were outside of town, in some deserted field. A desolate place. Janie turned off the engine, turned to Ajay, smiled. But how could she resist? They greeted the dawn, lying in each other's arms on the unfolded seats. At that moment, AJ had no doubt that he would break up with Lexi. He wouldn't give up the baby, of course, but there would be no wedding. It wasn't easy telling Lexi the truth. But AJ wasn't going to cheat either. Why would he do that? He's not doing anything wrong. He met someone else, fell in love. It happens. After all, he wasn't Lexi's property. He was a free man who was free to do with his life as he pleased. But Lexi looked at Ajay with those eyes. There was hope and adoration, love and tenderness in them. It was hard to tell the truth when looking into those devoted eyes. Ajay felt like the ultimate scoundrel as he bluntly shared the news with his now ex-fiancée. "Lexi," he began. She flinched. It was as if Ajay's words had caused her physical pain. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Are you in a hurry? You don't know this Janie at all. Beautiful girl. You're young. I get it. It's a fling. But why take it out on me? If you want New York so badly, let's go together. There's nothing keeping me here anyway." Ajay felt his anger boiling up inside him. This girl doesn't understand anything. He wants to go to New York to start a new life. The one he's dreamed of for so long. Maybe even make it as a rock musician. If it doesn't work out, he'll work in his newly acquired specialty. New York is a city of opportunity. He didn't need the burden of an obsessive Lexi and a baby. Lexi cried, begged, apologized. Ajay never realized why. The guy was angry, insulting the girl, trying to hurt her as much as possible. He realized that he was being cruel to Lexi, but his angry words were his way of trying to break the connection with the annoying girl, to push her away from him. And she was really starting to annoy AJ a lot, pissing him off like never before. Ajay reminded Lexi of her country roots, her not always literate speech and narrow-mindedness. He accused his ex-fiancée of lacking ambition, calling her a dumb peasant, a burden. Lexi nodded in response to all these insults, agreed and promised to change. Another woman in her place would have gotten angry, started insulting her unfaithful fiancé back. But she clung to EJ with all her might and was willing to forgive him absolutely anything. It even felt a little good. Next to Lexi, Ajay felt like a prize, almost a deity. See how she was fighting for him. The guy realized that by humiliating the girl he was trampling her, but he couldn't stop. He was getting revenge on Lexi for causing him so much trouble, and he was also asserting himself. Eventually, Ajay left Lexi's apartment, slamming the door. At that moment, he felt light and free. No, of course, the kid wasn't going anywhere. He'd have to pay child support. Maybe even socialize with him. Ajay didn't want to be as mythical a character in the eyes of his own son or daughter as his own father. Of course, he wouldn't keep the child. He would be an occasional presence in his life, and of course provide for him. This little man will eventually realize everything, and will be proud of his successful, determined father. Ajay decided to dispense with explanations with his relatives. Things would hardly go as smoothly here as they had with Lexi. He'd call later and tell them everything. When he gets there, he'll leave a note. And by the way, ask them to keep an eye on Lexi and the baby. No matter how hard he tried, Ajay couldn't get the baby out of his thoughts. He already felt responsible for this little life. The 24 hours before leaving, Ajay stayed with his buddy Edward and then the train station. Janie's shining eyes, heading off to her new life with only a light backpack, a long road trip behind her. Ajay withdrew all his savings. His grandfather set aside a tidy sum for his grandson EJ to save each year. It was, he said, the startup capital that every man needs. Now this money came in very handy. EJ used it to rent an apartment for him and Janie. They lived on it for the first time, until they found a job. Grandfather, grandmother, mother, they were always trying to call AJ. Probably wanted to tell their son and grandson that they resented what he'd done. Thought they could influence him, maybe even bring him home. But the kid dropped those calls. He explained everything to them in a letter, and to talk to his relatives until they cooled down, had not the slightest desire. And then time would pass, things would settle down. Ajay will find a job. To get a job in the capital, he will have something to please his own. That's when they'll talk. Until then, it wasn't time. Janie thought AJ was doing the right thing. Older relatives are often the ones who drag us down without realizing it, she said thoughtfully. When AJ dropped the call from his mother again, I thought, they're trying to force us into their own boxes, trying to make the kids live by their own rules. But we're not their property, and we don't have to organize our lives to please them. We are individuals, adults. Ajay agreed with every word Janie said. True, they hadn't been together long. The young beauty had quickly found a wealthy patron in the capital and had gone to him without a second thought. Ajay felt abandoned, humiliated, lost. He felt almost physically hurt by the girl's betrayal. He thought he had finally met his soulmate. Janie understood him like no one else, and he agreed with every word she said. It was a rare thing. It seemed like the two of them could do it together, to conquer New York shoulder to shoulder, and now it's happening. But the boy couldn't suffer for long. He had to find a new place to live, look for a better paying job. Going back was out of the question. After a month and a half of fruitless searches, EJ finally got lucky. He was hired as a junior economist in the staff of a not too successful, but obviously reliable company. It seemed to the guy that this was just the beginning, the start of his way to a successful, prosperous life. But more than 10 years passed, and still there. EJ still worked at a not the most prestigious position. He had barely moved up the career ladder, and he didn't have any prospects. Then, after getting a good job, the guy called his mother. He was ready for a serious conversation. Yes, of course, the mother will shout, accuse her son, maybe even demand that he return. But the parents surprised Ajay. How could you do this to us, to Lexi? That question, the reproach, was quite expected. The boy remained silent, letting his mother blow off steam. But her next phrase made an incredible impression on him. Lexi was so worried about your betrayal that she lost her baby. She ended up in the hospital, barely saved. We called you to tell you Lexi was in the NICU, and you never answered? Ajay was digesting the news. Oddly enough, he was hurt at the thought of the baby being gone. In theory, A guy should be happy the problem had solved itself. But he felt a mixture of pain, disappointment, and unspeakable longing. Did AJ get over it? Of course he had. Now it was even easier to turn the page and start his life over. AJ worked hard, with prospects, saving money. His whole life consisted of reports and traveling from the office to home and back. No partying, no bright new acquaintances, and certainly no beautiful girls. AJ had completely abandoned his guitar. It was now gathering dust in a corner, unneeded. There was no time to play, no mood. After a couple of years, EJ managed to take a mortgage on a small apartment in an old house in the suburbs without repairs, but it was his own. Relatives helped with the first installment. Further, the guy himself then sincerely rejoiced, thought that the beginning was laid. But again time passed and nothing changed. EJ lived in a tiny 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the capital, spending a lot of time on the road to work. Pulled money from paycheck to paycheck, saved on everything, and only in social networks on his pages carefully built the image of a successful man. It seemed to be working out pretty well. AJ knew that his friends and relatives from his hometown were watching him. Let them think that their fellow countrymen had succeeded. AJ's personal life didn't work out. No, he had the occasional fling. But all these ladies were like one, they had to stay somewhere for the first time. E.J.'s apartment was being used as a staging area. The man was well aware of that, and now he was already thinking of Lexi with longing and nostalgia. Her care, tenderness, love, sensitivity, attention, respect. Next to her, AJ felt like a king. She gave him the feeling of wings behind his back. And the others, they always only used AJ. The man understood it perfectly well and agreed. Where could he go? Back then, in his youth, it seemed to AJ that he would have many more like Lexi. Only as the years passed did he realize that strong feelings and sincerity in relationships were rare. Only there was no taking anything back. AJ was very happy to get a call from his old friend Sam. They had been together since high school and until E.J.'s departure for New York. Life, of course, divorced the buddies in different directions, but they were still connected by many things, warm memories, common childhood and youth. All of this does not disappear without a trace. Now it turns out Sam has decided to settle down after all. He has a wedding coming up, and he invites his childhood friend, who now lives in New York, to the celebration. But what a New Yorker will find time in his busy schedule for an old friend? 100 years have not seen each other, and here is such an occasion. This half-joking phrase once again convinced EJ that in his hometown he is considered quite established and happy man. The activity in social networks was not in vain. EJ has never once traveled to his hometown in all these years. His mother, grandmother, and grandfather themselves have been to visit him a few times. And AJ? He didn't want to go back for some reason. But now the man suddenly felt that he was ready to see his small homeland again, to meet old friends for whom he is a successful economist from New York, to walk along the streets familiar from his childhood, to visit a rock bar, to feel himself not a gray loser, but the capital's successful guest who managed to build a career, to get out of the wilderness. It's so great, isn't it? Of course I will, Sam AJ replied to his friend. AJ arrived in his hometown in the late afternoon. He didn't take a cab. He decided to walk. Not much had changed here. Same dusty stretches of highway, same sidewalks, same lush greenery. Familiar streets, parks, squares. A strange feeling came over the man. He longed for his past self, young, full of plans and hopes. It seemed that he was not like all the others, ordinary. They would stay in this city, and he would be something like Andrew Sokolovsky for the people of the city, acquaintance with whom the locals would be proud. It didn't work out. Of course, EJ lives and works in New York, but it's not what he once dreamed of. True, the locals don't realize it. At least for 1 week, EJ would feel like the man he wanted to be when he was younger. That was good. The family greeted his son and grandson with joy and warmth. They hadn't seen each other much lately. Grandmother and grandfather. The older relatives had become quite old, and once they had both seemed energetic, strong-willed, all-powerful. Time spares no one. And Mom is no longer the beautiful young woman she used to be. They're the only people on the whole planet who care about AJ. When they were gone, the man didn't even want to think about the days when he would be all alone. The next day, AJ met Sam and his fiancée at a coffee shop. At first, AJ was confused by so many strangers. Then his friends responded to him. All of them came to the party with their other halves family, serious people. They all had children, jobs, apartments, cars. Looking at old friends, standing on the arm with their wives, EJ once again felt that his life was passing somehow aimlessly. Solemn wedding, obligatory promenade with a photographer to the memorable places of the city. Champagne was flowing. The guests cheered, laughed, and showered the newlyweds with compliments. Edward and Nayli really looked great, beautiful, in love, happy. Then it was the restaurant's turn. AJ was relaxed by then, getting to know everyone he didn't know. The guests treated him warmly and friendly, asked about New York, spoke respectfully about EJ's career. Everything was exactly as he had imagined. At the restaurant, the dressed-up crowd was already waiting for the toastmaster, a cheerful, smiling fellow. A new batch of guests had gathered on the porch. It was here that EJ got a surprise he hadn't expected. Among the crowd of newcomers, he saw Lexi. At first, the man couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was just a dream. But why would she be here at all? Lexi had changed, of course, but not so much that AJ didn't recognize her. Still the same huge turquoise eyes, long, slightly wavy hair. Slender, touching, almost transparent. Only now there was a confidence in Lexi's gaze that made her face even more attractive. Lexi was wearing a flowing dress of a marvelous emerald hue that went so well with her eyes. Her hair was nicely pinned up, revealing her beautiful face, and it spread over her graceful shoulders. She looked much younger than women her age and radiated warmth and energy. AJ could feel it even from a distance. "Is that Lexi?" AJ turned to Kaylin standing next to her. "What is she doing here?" "Lexi?" Edward invited her, Edward answered. AJ grinned. Kaylin wasn't helping him much. Lexi noticed him at that moment too. Their eyes met, and Lexi smiled. That beaming smile of hers had a strange effect on AJ. AJ didn't even immediately remember what a beautiful, radiant, warm smile Lexi had, illuminating her face with some special light. On the one hand, she charmed him, but on the other hand, the man felt anger rising in his soul. Yes, he was angry at Lexi. For some reason, she was the one he suddenly assigned blame for his life not working out too well. Lexi had been just a clingy girl back then, years ago, annoying and demanding of his attention, unwilling to give him freedom. She was the one who had made him run away to New York when he wasn't quite ready for it. It's all her fault. And now AJ is forced to live a miserable existence. And Lexi showed up at the wedding so beautiful, clearly successful, confident, and smiling at him now with a sense of superiority. AJ nodded dryly at Lexi and hurried off into the crowd. But now the celebration was no longer as enjoyable as before. AJ watched from his seat as Lexi cheered. She talked easily with the guests. Many knew her. She laughed. She danced. Lexi was being asked to dance by the men. The young lady was clearly a success, which is not surprising. But strangely enough, she showed up to the wedding alone. Colin said Edward invited her. Why would she do that? Was it because of him, AJ? Lexi was clearly enjoying herself, and everything seemed to be going well for her. Her jewelry seemed to be modest, inconspicuous earrings and a thin necklace. But AJ was well aware of how much it cost a fortune, as were Lexi's shoes from a decidedly not budget brand. AJ recognized the signature red soles. Lexi didn't look like she lived in her town at all. She looked modest, yet expensive and sophisticated. The local ladies were old-fashioned, preferring to shine at events like weddings, bright makeup, flashy clothes, flashy hairstyles. Lexi stood out to them. And for some reason that pissed Ajay off. He felt like Lexi was looking at everyone with superiority, including himself. Ajay wanted to bring Lexi down to earth, to show her who she really was, a country girl, a former waitress he'd left years ago because he didn't want to commit to a country girl. She shouldn't be acting like a queen here. Ajay is the capital's guest at this wedding, not her. The man was waiting for the right opportunity, and now it presented itself. Lexi, picking up the tray, hurried over to an elderly woman, seemingly the bride's grandmother. She was feeling ill from the heat. Lexi noticed this and rushed into the kitchen. She came back with a tray with a carafe of cold water and a couple of glasses. Ajay hurried toward his ex-fiancée. He wanted to humiliate her. A suitable phrase was already ripe in his head. Hey, the past just won't let go. Waitress reflexes in action. Those words were meant to remind Lexi of her past, of who she really was. Lexi looked up at Ajay with surprised eyes and seemed a little confused. Just like that, all of her outer gloss had come off. Lexi hadn't changed a bit, and it seemed that Ajay was still a huge influence on her, just like before. "Hello to you too," Lexi said quietly. She placed the tray in front of the old lady and stepped back. Ajay, pleased with himself, went to his seat. He felt almost happy. Yes, he had succeeded in hurting Lexi. Now she didn't look so arrogant and radiant anymore. That's great. Ajay asked a young girl, who seemed to be Nayeli's niece, to dance. The young lady had been casting amorous glances at the lonely guest from the capital all evening, having fallen under the spell of a supposedly successful man from New York. Young people fall for them nowadays. Ajay decided to take advantage of the impression he made on the girl and asked her to dance. She gladly agreed. The man did it for Lexi's sake, let her see how much fun he was having here and how popular he was. It seemed that Ajay had succeeded in achieving the desired effect. Lexi looked up at him, hugging her young cousin, the bride, in a dance, and there was sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was jealous. Perhaps she still had feelings for him. It was nice to think so. But it wasn't enough for the man. He wanted others to make fun of Lexi. Why, he didn't understand. Perhaps by humiliating her, he felt more successful and important. Silly, of course, but that's the way it was. Ajay watched Lexi discreetly, waiting for the right opportunity. And lo and behold, it happened. The girl didn't notice the champagne spilled on the floor and slipped, awkwardly swinging her arms. This moment was seen by many people. Lexi almost fell. At the last moment, she managed to hold on to the column. Someone hid, someone smiled, and Ajay uttered at the top of his voice. "There you go, just like you were an elephant in a china shop. You're still an elephant in a china shop." "Are you talking about the elephant in the china shop again?" came a suddenly familiar voice. Ajay shifted his gaze from Lexi to the man at her back and couldn't believe his eyes. It was Kalen. He had recently arrived at the restaurant, otherwise Ajay would have noticed his idol. Kalen, keeping his eyes on Ajay, offered his hand to Lexi, helped her up and gave her a familiar hug around the waist. Ajay couldn't believe his eyes. Lexi looked sad at that. The elephant in the china shop. Is that what you called her at the bar back then, remember? Ajay nodded, though that moment had been erased from his memory. But since Kalen says so, it must have been. "That phrase of yours is how my introduction to this beautiful girl began." Kalen smiled at Lexi. "So thank you for that. But don't talk to her like that again, or you'll be dealing with me." Kalen seemed to be joking while saying that sentence, but his eyes were very serious. A stunned Ajay returned to his seat. His lady, his young cousin Nayeli, sat down next to him and began to chatter something excitedly. But EJ was not concerned with her. He was looking at Kaylin, who was very gently supporting Lexi by the arm. A crowd immediately gathered around them, of course. Edward was there as well. Old acquaintances were drinking, cracking jokes, discussing something cheerfully. But AJ couldn't bring himself to join them, even though he really wanted to. He was too stunned, lost, confused. "I don't understand anything. What's even going on here?" he uttered at last. "Kaylin, what's he doing here? Isn't he a buddy of Edward's?" "Edward has known him since his youth. Kaylin is his idol," replied E.J.'s young companion, and she happily told everything she knew. It turned out that Kaylin, who has made a good career in New York, often visits his hometown. He has parents here who didn't want to leave their small homeland, and friends, of course. Kaylin kept in touch with Edward and his buddies all this time. They often met at the Rock Bar. Ajay would have been in that hangout too if he hadn't left. Gradually, an almost friendly relationship developed between them all. Lexi? He met her at the same Rock Bar. The girls shared details. They say she was insulted by some guy right in front of Kaylin, and it was because of that he paid attention to her. He liked her immediately. Kaylin fell in love with her, even wrote songs for her. In my opinion, those songs he wrote for Lexi are the most beautiful. But I think she was in love with someone else at the time. Some unhappy love affair she had. That's how I would edit this text. Who can resist Kaylin? And this girl was hoping, expecting something from her old boyfriend. He'd done something bad to her, dumped her before the wedding, I think. And that's when she was in a terrible state. Nayli said Lexi was even in the hospital. I don't know what happened to her, but AJ knew. He knew why Lexi was in the hospital, because she was so distressed. She lost her baby, their baby, Edward and Nayli told me. Lexi didn't go back to work at the Rock Bar. She went to her family in the country. And Kaylin found her, got her address through some acquaintances, and went. Kaylin himself. It's such an amazing story. I never would have believed it could happen. Don't believe in fairy tales after that. Yeah, it's a really unique story. For some reason, Ajay was picturing it all very vividly. It was like watching a movie. Kaylin went to the Rock Bar every night, hoping to meet the waitress who charmed him. Of course, he learned all he could about Lexi from mutual acquaintances. Edward, Sergi, Andrew, all of them, of course, knew about AJ dumping Lexi before the wedding and moving to LA. The guys didn't judge. They understood their friend. Especially since he wasn't going to give up on the baby. They even supported him. Approved of this deed. Well, everyone can fall out of love, but dreams should come true, Andrew said in a deep voice when he found out AJ was leaving. Kaylin saved Lexi, pulled her out of the depths of despair. Been there for her during the most difficult time of her life. At first, Andrew came to her village every day. Every day, E.J.'s young companion exclaimed adorably. But she, it's strange, didn't want to be with him. Is that how it's possible? I can't imagine it. Such a man. And she must have loved that old one of hers, the one who left her on the eve of her wedding. But Kaylin kept visiting her. It's so romantic. So, of course, Lexi melted. And they've been together ever since. They got married? Ajay saw once in the press about Kaylin's wedding, but there were no photos from the celebration online, and Andrew preferred to keep his private life private. Ajay had no idea that Kaylin's wife was Lexi. Lexi, whom he had run away from years ago, and for whom, apparently, he still had some feelings. Why else would he suddenly have this strange desire to humiliate her in front of everyone? Yes, they got married, said AJ's companion. The wedding was here, by the way. Both of them didn't want to make a fuss about the event. Everything went quietly, modestly. Then they flew to New York and now live there. They flew here for a couple of days to visit Andrew's parents. Edward found out about it and invited them to the wedding. Pretty cool, huh? Lexi got here first. Kaylin had some urgent business to attend to, but here he is. Aren't they a great couple? Ajay looked at Andrew and Lexi. They were sitting at the other end of the table surrounded by guests. Andrew had his arm gently around his spouse's shoulders, and she had her hand on his knee. Idle. They really looked like a harmonious couple and looked great together. Ajay suddenly realized that he was the one who wanted to hug Lexi and look into her eyes. He's the one who wants that woman's smile. He would never again meet someone who would love him so genuinely. Ajay had tried many times, but it was all wrong. He himself, with his own hands, destroyed his happiness years ago. And now his reality is this: he works for pennies, lives alone. No friends, no favorite woman by his side, no children. The man who was once his idol and whom EJ still sincerely admires. Kaylin considers him a scoundrel. And quite rightly so, by the way. They have kids as if reading his mind. AJ's companion completed the picture of Lexi's current happy life. She had no idea that AJ was the abusive groom who had abandoned his bride before the wedding. Otherwise, it was unlikely she would have spoken to him in such a friendly manner. The boy and girl are twins, continued EJ's companion. I've seen them, they're so cute, like the babies in the commercials. Ajay felt like a lowlife. At first, he had wanted to make a splash with his acquaintances, to come here as a visitor from Los Angeles. Successful, more successful than his friends in Nashville. At least for a couple days, to feel like someone more important than he was. And wanting to humiliate Lexi was pathetic and ridiculous, too. She was doing so well in her life that his attempts to ruin her mood seemed silly, to say the least. Ajay couldn't stand to be here anymore. The very atmosphere was weighing on him. The sight of happy faces, familiar faces from the past, made him sick to his stomach. It was not enough to start behaving inappropriately in front of everyone. Ajay felt close to smashing a plate on the floor, smashing a wall with his fist, or worse, crying. He was cut short by a cloud of all sorts of emotions. Ajay realized he had to leave silently, quickly, without saying goodbye to anyone. Kaylin himself was here. It was unlikely anyone would notice his disappearance now. The man got up and headed for the exit. Hurry, hurry, we must hurry. Hurry to get far away from here. It didn't matter where. It was not a matter of the first importance. And so AJ wandered through the night streets of Nashville. He's already gotten a decent distance from the restaurant. His feet carry him toward downtown. The man passed a rock bar. No, he had no desire to return to that place. He left behind the public garden where he spent so much time with his friends. Bypassed the amusement park. He had many memories with each of these places, mostly happy and pleasant ones. He didn't want to go home. His mom, grandfather, and grandmother would be there. They'd start asking Ajay about what happened, worrying. No, it's better to be outside alone. Ajay would come back later, when the family was tired. The man walked through Nashville wherever he was going. Crushed, confused, he felt like a complete nonentity and regretted coming to his friend's wedding. "Wait, there's no way I can catch up with you," came a voice from behind him. The man turned around. The same young girl, the bride's cousin, was rushing towards him. "What are you doing here? You left so suddenly." "I followed you." Your face was strange and very sad, I think she blurted out. Why did you follow me?" the man wondered. "Well, because I didn't feel like breaking up with you." The man looked into her pure, sincere eyes and wondered, could he, so lowly and mean, really like this young creature? To all appearances, the girl was really enchanted by him. Strangely, but it made his soul warm. He realized that all was not yet lost. He's only 35. A whole life was ahead of him, and what kind of life it would be depended only on him. Obviously, he's made a lot of mistakes. But he's only human. The main thing is to make the right conclusions and live on, live happily. Something needs to change in yourself and your worldview. If the previous actions led to such a deplorable result, it means only one thing now: it is necessary to act differently. That's all. The girl looked at him with hope. In her eyes he saw admiration. No, the man was not going to take advantage of the young beauty's naivety. Right now he would just walk her to the restaurant, and there was no telling what might happen to a young girl on the street at night. He'll say something encouraging and wise to her goodbye. He's an adult, after all, and will leave this town. He's got a long way to go to work out his mistakes. But it's going to work out, it's going to work out, it's going to work out. Found her under the fence, mother-in-law, kicked out pregnant daughter-in-law. But she couldn't have imagined such a thing. Lexi remembered perfectly well how her father had left the family, trying to take almost everything he could carry out of the apartment. She had come back rather late from her girlfriend's birthday party and almost fell down, tangled in a pile of appliances, things, for some reason stacked at the doorstep. The girl even thought that someone had broken into the apartment and wanted to jump out into the entrance. But she heard her parents' voices coming from the big room, which served as a bedroom and a hall for the reception of merry companies. Hurriedly pulling off her boots, hanging her jacket on the coat rack, and tossing her backpack, Lexi headed out to find out what was going on, and caught a strange and scary scene. Her parents were fighting as hard as they had ever fought before, and didn't even pay her any attention when she peeked into the room. It was as if Lexi's daughter suddenly saw a total stranger instead of her adoring father, a violent, screaming man with a throbbing vein in his neck. It seemed as if this angry stranger was about to start destroying everything in the apartment, but instead he methodically walked around the room and collected things, not stopping to argue with his wife. What makes you think I'm a horny deer? When were you ever going to tell me the truth? Never. Live, Eugene, wear horns, work and pay for everything. What made you so sure, Isabel, that I wasn't going anywhere? You thought I was a fool, so you stopped hiding your affairs. That's great. Don't think you're going to get away with this. If you file for alimony, you know I'll contest it. I'll have them do a forensic audit. I know now that all these years I've been raising a daughter who wasn't my own. Lexi froze on the threshold, shocked by such strange news. But her mom didn't look confused or hurt. If she had, she would have cried, claimed there had been a mistake, offered to double-check everything. But no. The woman responded just as aggressively to her husband. "Oh, Eugene, you make me laugh. He won't pay alimony. He's going to ask for a forensic test." Who are you going to hurt? Have you ever heard the saying about the father who raised the child? How are you going to explain to Lexi that she's nothing to you now? Won't you have a heart of hearts for her? You remember how much fun you two have playing together, skiing, even going fishing in the winter and summer. Are you going to forget all that? Throw it out of your head like garbage in a bucket. Good father. He forgot his daughter in no time. The man threw everything he had in his hands to the floor with rage and swung to hit his wife. But he held back and shouted, "How can I still treat her if she is a visible reminder of your sin? Isabel, you knew I wouldn't forgive adultery. Then why did you make me do it, even though there was a risk that it would come out? Raising someone else's child. What's inside? You couldn't wait for me to come back. I was traveling long distances for my family, trying to make more money so you wouldn't need anything. When Lexi was born, I worked even harder. What about a baby in the family? There's so much to do. I just don't know why I stayed up 24 hours a day sometimes. It turns out I didn't really have a family. Just a cheating wife and a kid that the nanny took out on the side. Eugene, I'm sorry, it was just a random episode. A moment of passion, nothing more. I've tried 100 times to explain it to you, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand." The man even found the strength to laugh. "I wonder if Isabel's a thing. I think I had a right to know the truth from the beginning. Then maybe it wouldn't be so painful now. I fought with my mom for you. It was like she could feel your lying nature in her heart. Eugene turned away from Isabel so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes and noticed Lexi standing in the doorway. The man felt uneasy. He'd thought of this girl as his daughter for so many years that it was impossible to fall out of love with her overnight. "I'm sorry, Lexi," the man said, and began to gather up the things he had left behind. Then, waving his hand, he sat down on the couch. "Lexi." Mom didn't know what to say. The girl solved the problem herself. Walking up to the man, she lowered herself to the floor in front of him so she could look into his eyes and said quietly, "For me, you will forever remain the most real daddy. Just so you know, whenever you want to talk to me, I'll always be glad to." The man couldn't help himself. On impulse, he hugged the girl he had considered his daughter for 14 years and headed for the exit. Lexi heard the head of the family rumbling something in the hallway, but she didn't go out. To the girl in general, this situation seemed like some kind of strange, sticky nightmare. Only when the front door slammed, she dared to ask, "Mom, how come? Why did Daddy think I wasn't his own daughter?" Isabel, from whom the subtle odor of booze emanated, did not lie. "Oh, but it's embarrassing to tell your own daughter that. But you're an adult, so listen, if only so you don't make the same mistakes I did. I married Eugene when I was 18 years old. He'd already been in the army, got a job as a delivery driver. He brought goods to the store where my mother, your grandmother, ran the store, and he saw me. Anyway, he started courting me. But his mother and my mother, of course, were against it. They thought we weren't a couple at all. My mother said I'd die of boredom with a village level. She said that he can only talk about the quality of manure, and with him even in the movies will be ashamed to go to the movies, not to mention the theater. But you remember your grandmother, Lexi, you should remember your grandmother. You were 10 years old when she left. Do you remember how she wasn't shy with her words?" A confused Lexi nodded. The grandmother she was named after, she remembered. She was always on parade, but she could express herself in such a way that there was nothing left to say. Isabel took a breath and continued to share the family secret with her daughter. "My mother-in-law, who, like my mother, also single-handedly raised a child, was not shy in expressions. Directly in my eyes called me a city slut. She declared that she would not give her blessing for her son's marriage to a slacker. But who would listen to the young people then? We got married, and of course I went to the village for 80 days. And then I settled down in this city apartment. We lived well, at least at first. Then money became scarce. My mother refused to help with finances. You do it yourself, children yourself, since you already consider yourself so mature that you got married. Friends advised Eugene that trucking was more profitable, and he started traveling. The money did get better, but I got bored. So I decided to go to my high school reunion to get some compliments. A guy who'd been courting me since high school just turned my head. Kind of made up for lost time. I'm not saying I resisted. Certainly had no reason to be proud of myself. It just so happens you're not really Eugene's daughter. Your real biological father, by the way, found out from me that you were born, but by then he was getting married and didn't want to change anything in his life. So I had to keep lying. My mother-in-law, as soon as she saw you tiny, started saying that you were not from their family. She only came to visit a few times, and all the time she frowned as if she had eaten a lemon without sugar, so disgusting to look at. She never invited us to vacation. My mother-in-law couldn't know for sure that I had deceived her son, but she was convinced of it. And she didn't need proof. I'm sure she kept telling Eugene you weren't his daughter. Yes, she must have planted doubts in his mind, even though it took years. But today, Eugene, your father, has changed. I mean, not really, but, well, Eugene started making complaints about me for not doing my chores around the house, for coming home from work drunk. He said I was setting a bad example for you, his daughter. In general, in the heat of the moment, I couldn't stand it. I blurted out everything that I had kept secret for a long time. Blurted out that you are not his daughter at all. So stupidly, with my own tongue, I destroyed the delicate balance. Lexi didn't know what to do. She was drawn to her father. And paradoxically, she felt sorry for her mother. And it also hurt like crazy that her familiar world was crumbling. Lexi's class was made up of students from single-parent families. They seemed to try to pretend that they didn't care about having a mom and dad together. But Lexi still caught the occasional hint of jealousy. Lexi was genuinely happy, thinking her parents were quite happy. Up until this evening, her family had seemed like a safe haven. And now it appeared there was no idyll. It was all a sham. Lexi's good mood as she crossed the threshold of her home was gone. A vague and therefore even more frightening prospect loomed ahead. Before the court hearing where Lexi was to be asked which parent she wanted to stay with, Eugene approached her. He didn't look the girl in the eye and said, "I now, when not on the road, I live at my mom's place in the village. It's cheaper and more convenient. On the payment of alimony, I will not object, but take you to me cannot. Especially you know the whole truth, and I'm afraid with my mom you will not find common ground. I raised you, and you're a complete stranger to her." So Eugene asked the court to let Lexi live with her mom. Lexi got mad and screamed, uninhibited. "Fuck you and your alimony. And that crazy grandma I don't even remember, fuck you. I don't need anything from you, I'll do without." Isabel, who was talking to an acquaintance, jumped up to her daughter and almost ex-husband and pulled the furious Lexi away from Eugene. The girl was sobbing. "Let's live without his help. I don't want to see him anymore, since he's so determined to eliminate me from his life." The divorce proceedings of Isabel and Eugene did not take long. The court made all the proper rulings, and the couple began a new phase of their lives. It would seem in the schedule of strong changes had not changed, because the head of the family for a long time was not at home. But the situation became something nervous. Isabel, like many women after the fateful changes, made a new haircut, began to pay special attention to her appearance. Of course, Lexi wanted her mom to be happy, even if it meant the breakup of a seemingly prosperous family. Of course, the dubious credit didn't belong to Eugene at all. At any rate, Lexi didn't blame her mom. And she reacted quite tolerantly to the news, which came less than a year after the final point in the family's unhappy history. "Anyway, daughter, we're having guests over tonight, Stephen, who's a friend of mine, and his son Kieran. I have 2 requests of you. First, I'd like you to help me clean up. Secondly, I want you to make a good impression on our guests. So dress tastefully, well, not flashy." Since that hopelessly ruined Saturday, Lexi had been in a constant stream of trouble. Isabel was literally spilling out in front of the guests, offering to taste the salad or the roasted meat. Stephen's bartending, who presented the landlady with 2 measly bouquets of 3 tulips each looking like it was at least 1,000,000 scarlet roses, infuriated Lexi. Even more antipathetic to Lexi was Stephen's son Kieran. He was only a year older than Lexi and proudly announced to the crowd that he had no intention of wasting time in school and would apply to college after 9th grade. Stephen nodded contentedly as he listened to his son. Isabel, who always told her daughter to get higher education, also approved of this decision, but at the same time she asked worriedly, "Well done, Kieran. But probably in the college of deferment from the army is not." The guy grinned. "So I don't need it. I have chronic flat feet, just like my dad." In the middle of the evening, Stephen proposed, and Lexi was miffed that her mom hadn't even consulted her, but had said yes right away. He clinked his juice glass with his fiancée and then started shouting, bitter. Like a fool. Lexi probably would have had an easier time accepting the next change if her mom and Stephen hadn't decided to move into the bride's spacious apartment and rent out the groom's place. When the guests, to the girl's relief, left, Lexi, clearing the table, asked her mom. I just don't understand why your fiancé and his son decided to live with us if they have their own apartment. I'm happy to squeeze for the sake of strangers. Isabel was indignant. No one will squeeze you. Kieran will live in the other room. Your nursery will still be your room and my room will still be mine. Lexi tried to explain her point of view. It's still like a dorm. I don't think it's right. I can't even walk around half naked in my own house in the heat. It's a downer. If you want my opinion, I think it would be perfect if this Stephen of yours invited you to live with him. I can manage the housekeeping here without a problem. Isabel was adamant, and then she confessed. We're going to need money soon, so we're going to have to rent the place out. I'm expecting Stephen's baby. Lexi understood that her mother, quite still a young 34-year-old woman, and such a scenario was quite predictable. However, the prospect of not only seeing a strange man and an unsympathetic guy all the time, but also becoming a babysitter loomed. This destroyed at the root of all the joy of the fact that the parent found her happiness. Stephen, unlike the man Lexi had long considered a father, didn't bother to work at all and mostly lay on the couch. Kieran, to the girl's great joy, did not flicker in front of her eyes for very long. One day he simply gathered his things in a bag and, asking his father for money, said, "Anyway, I'm moving in with a friend. She and I are kind of on good terms. Besides, her parents went abroad and from her house to college is a 3-minute walk. Okay, have fun. I'll send you money." "Just kidding. I'll come to you for financial support." Isabel tried to protest, reminding her stepson that he had just turned 16, but he smirked and said, "Isabel, you should be jumping for joy that I'm moving out, not playing the caring hen." Besides, he nodded at his stepmother's visible belly. "You'll soon have noise, screams, and the stench of maggots. What the hell do I need that kind of happiness for?" Stephen didn't scold for his rather brazen treatment of his stepmother. He took the money out of his wallet and, handing it to his son, grumbled angrily. "That's it. Go on, get out of here. We are going to reason here. He's a philosopher. He himself has long since left the larva stage. And what are you now according to your classification? A man. A mystery." He continued, making Lexi even more disgusted. But Kieran didn't seem to be used to such jokes. He took the bills held out to him and, picking up his bag, walked away. Lexi had a half-sister, Maggie, on the eve of the millennium, when the whole world was preparing for the millennium, and there was a serious discussion on TV about the year 2000 and possible computer hardware failures. So New Year's Eve spent with friends was pretty much the last island of calm of the period after Lexi's parents divorced. She cheered, sang songs, and desperately hoped that the gloomy premonitions wouldn't come true. However, things were turning out to be even worse than she could have predicted. For more than 3 years, since her mom had brought Maggie's youngest daughter's bundle home from the hospital, her oldest daughter, Lexi, had been getting the brunt of it. Lexi was the one who most often changed her sister's soiled diapers and diapers, threw laundry in the wash, hung it up, unfolded it, and so on in an endless circle. Stephen looked at his stepdaughter from the couch and chuckled, turning to his wife. "Isabel, you're a good girl. You're a young woman to have a baby. First you got a nanny, and then a cradle." Even preparation for exams was not considered a valid reason for not doing some of the housework. Only once, when Lexi's fever was over 39 degrees, was she graciously allowed to be treated. Isabel now sided with Stephen in every argument. With her tacit consent, her stepson could take any item he liked from the house or ask for any amount of money, even without a promise to give it back. And for Lexi to buy anything for herself outside of her own means was out of the question. Her mother-in-law, Janie Swan, treated Lexi like a waste of space or a servant, and when she visited, she never brought the girl an apple. Though she did bring her adult grandson, Kieran, despite the fact that he lived apart from his own grandson, early fruit and sweets in bags. Stephen would then pick up the goodies intended for Kieran and take them to his girlfriend's apartment. Simple-minded Maggie, who had seen Lexi around her more often than her mother since she was a baby, treated her little sister to the gifts she had received. Only the girl did not have the conscience to offend the child. Under such conditions, Lexi considered entering the teacher training college on the budget as the real miracle and made every effort not to be expelled. However, it became more and more difficult. Another morning in the family began with a scandal. Isabel shouted that it was time to get up and take her daughter to daycare. Lexi sluggishly resisted. "Mommy, but I can't today, I'm exhausted." To ask that Stephen for once his own, by the way, his daughter took. "I did the dishes again yesterday after everyone else. I didn't get my essay typed up until 4 this morning. I have a second period today, so I can sleep in instead of dragging myself through the nasty weather to this equally nasty daycare." Lexi wanted to add that she hadn't actually asked her mom to give birth to Maggie, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't the girl's fault that the main care about her was dumped on her older sister. Even without that phrase, however, a quarrel had broken out. Isabel shouted in unison with Stephen that she, Lexi, was completely ungrateful and did not remember any good at all. "By the way, I'm the one who feeds and sings you, you slacker. She's learning to work her ass off," Stephen grumbled. There was nothing unusual in these reproaches, though. Perhaps if Lexi wasn't so tired, she would have kept quiet, as she often did. But it all came together. Her studies, her part-time job, the household chores the rest of her family generously placed on her, the annoyance of a strange man invading her apartment, and the lack of sleep all combined to form a potent mix. Lexi dozed off in her tracksuit, then jumped up and stood in front of Stephen and began to say what she had to say. "I don't see your highness doing anything at all. Your mom does all the work, and I get a lot of work too. I love Maggie very much, but it's time you did something for your daughter, Stephen." "Who are you?" Stephen exclaimed. Lexi instinctively ducked, noticing the palm of her stepfather's hand flying in her direction, deciding to slap her back. After getting past her mom and running out of the room, Lexi found Kieran in the hallway. The boy was just taking off his shoes and muttered a greeting. "Let's eat. I haven't eaten since yesterday lunch. Laura gave me a hard time and wouldn't even let me come home." Isabel yelled that it was time to get up and take my daughter to daycare. Lexi fought back. "Mom, but I can't today. I'm exhausted." To ask that Stephen for once his own, by the way, the daughter took. "I did the dishes again yesterday after everyone else. I didn't get my essay typed up until 4 this morning. I have a second period today, so I can sleep in instead of dragging myself through the nasty weather to this equally nasty daycare." Lexi wanted to add that she hadn't actually asked her mom to give birth to Maggie, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't the girl's fault that the main care about her was dumped on her older sister. Even without that phrase, however, a quarrel had broken out. Isabel shouted in unison with Stephen that she, Lexi, was completely ungrateful and did not remember any good at all. "By the way, I'm the one who feeds and sings you, you slacker. She's learning to work her ass off," Stephen grumbled. There was nothing unusual in these reproaches, though. Perhaps if Lexi hadn't been so tired, she would have kept quiet, as she often did. But it all came together. Her studies, her part-time job, the household chores the rest of her family generously placed on her, the annoyance of a strange man invading her apartment, and the lack of sleep all combined to form a potent mix. Lexi dozed off in her tracksuit, then jumped up and stood in front of Stephen and began to say everything she had accumulated. "I don't see your highness doing anything. Your mom does all the work, and I get a lot of work too. I love Maggie very much, but it's time you did something for your daughter, Stephen." "Who are you?" Stephen exclaimed. Lexi instinctively ducked, noticing the palm of her stepfather's hand flying in her direction, deciding to slap her back. After getting past her mom and running out of the room, Lexi found Kieran in the hallway. The boy was just taking off his shoes and muttered a greeting. "Let's eat. I haven't eaten since lunch yesterday. Laura gave me a hard time and wouldn't even let me come home. Isabel was yelling at me to get up and take Maggie to daycare." Lexi fought back sluggishly. It had been over a year since she'd seen Eugene. Their last phone conversation had been crumpled. It seemed Eugene was trying to cope with a personal tragedy by overworking himself beyond measure. Lexi's attempts to call him had been unsuccessful, and there were no replies to messages sent. "I guess my mom is keeping quiet about the mystery of my birth because of my lover," Lexi thought. "And everything would have been fine up until now. Now I have to suffer through an old mom's sin." As expected, the apartment was rearranged that evening when Maggie's crib was brought in. Lexi's already small room was cramped, but there was no other option. She flatly refused to stay in the pass-through room, which caused a scornful remark from Kieran. "Oh, you'd think someone would be looking at you." The guy was clearly being sly, though. Lexi noticed that he didn't miss the opportunity to stare at her unhindered. Since Kieran had moved in, things had gotten worse. When no one was around to see, he made lewd suggestions to his stepsister, though he reduced them to jokes afterward. He pinched the girl, slapped her ass, and laughed in her face, noticing the consternation in Lexi's eyes. She repeatedly complained to her mother. The latter promised to deal with her stepson, but the conversations had no positive effect. Kieran didn't put Isabel in any way, and, making round eyes, presented the situation as if it was Lexi who was hitting on him, not him. Stephen, who had been advised by his stepdaughter to rein in his son, stood up for him. "And you, too, don't play the innocent part in front of Kieran. There's no place for a modern girl to try out." Lexi realized that there would be no help from her mother, and even less from her insolent husband. Sometimes Kieran would go away for a few days. Only then did Lexi sigh in relative peace. One summer morning, Isabel had taken Maggie to daycare early so her oldest daughter could sleep in a little longer, building up her strength for her last exam. Lexi rejoiced in vain at this good fortune, however, because as she was taking a shower, Kieran opened the bathroom door in the most unceremonious manner, ripping out a lock of hair on one side. Smirking, Kieran stated to the half-sister hiding behind the translucent curtain, "Hear me out, cutie. Or shall we start with me rubbing your back?" Grabbing the first vial from the shelf, the girl threw it at the insolent man. It was unlikely to scare him off, but someone rang demandingly at the apartment door, and Kieran muttered, "You've interrupted me at the most interesting point. I'm going to go see who's here." Lexi, horrified, hurriedly threw on her robe and ran to her room to get dressed. What was outside the door didn't inspire confidence in the girl. Dressing quickly, she pulled a pepper spray out of her backpack, determined to use it without any warning if Kieran got in her way. Without even combing her hair, she began to make her way to the exit. Fortunately, she didn't run into her half-brother. From the sound of water running, he was in the bathroom. The girl was furious. She was running out of patience. Of course, she could change the lock to a stronger one, but she realized that it would not solve the main problem. She was defenseless against Kieran, who did whatever he wanted. She wasn't going to be a victim, so she planned a serious conversation for tonight. Having passed the last difficult exam scheduled for that day, even better than one could expect after the stress of the morning, and thus closing the summer session, Lexi was glad that at least this problem was over. As agreed, the girl picked Maggie up at the daycare center, and on the way home she pondered how to start a conversation with all the residents of the apartment. She didn't want her little sister to witness the scandal. But it was possible to send her to the nursery to watch cartoons. What child would refuse? In the meantime, she would raise the central issue that having Kieran living in the apartment was in no way acceptable. After Maggie rushed off to the nursery after dinner, Lexi asked to stay in the kitchen for Stephen, who was about to go to his favorite couch by the TV. Kieran clearly didn't expect Lexi to dare tell him about his morning prank. he immediately started making excuses. I didn't realize the bathroom was occupied. It was obvious he was lying, and the girl blushed with indignation. Oh, what an ignoramus. And the fact that the water was on and the bathroom door was closed from the inside didn't clue you into anything. What are you lying about? Lexi took a breath to calm down a bit, to keep her tone of voice even and not startle Maggie with a scream, and continued. Anyway, Kieran, I can't stay under the same roof with you. Nothing good will come of it. With Mom and Stephen, you're still somehow playing the part of a decent person. But as soon as you and I are alone together, how do you act? It was noticeable that Kieran was nervous, but trying to make excuses for himself. Ugh, you're so serious. I was just trying to make a joke. So what if you're pretty? Do you even look at yourself in the mirror? There will be no reaction to your lean appearance. A liter of water won't be enough to make me want to look at you. Her half-brother's hurtful taunts didn't hurt her, and she gave her mother an ultimatum. You can't go on living like this. I'm very concerned about Kieran's behavior. Mom, either you kick him out or I'm leaving. Stephen had been silent until then, but now he cut into the conversation. Then go. Get the hell out of here. You're provoking Kieran yourself. As the saying goes, if the dog won't do it, the purse won't do it. I don't need you accusing him of any wrongdoing. That snake is hungry. Get out to here. You don't need to be slinging mud at my son in the hutch. Lexi was hurt not so much by her stepfather's words, but by the fact that her mom hadn't even thought to defend her. Isabel was silent. She acted as if she'd talked to Stephen about it a long time ago and decided everything was not in her daughter's favor. Mom, why aren't you saying anything? That you won't even say a word in defense of your daughter, who is now being insulted by your husband? Or do you also think I'm provoking this Kieran? Or is having a man in the house more important to you than what happens to your daughter? Even two? Maggie's in danger too. I don't know what that Kieran guy's got in his head. She's little, and she'll be easy for him to handle it all, Lexi pleaded. Stephen became enraged. You cunt. Keep your fucking mouth shut. If I ever hear that kind of suspicion about Kieran again, I'll have you out of the apartment in a heartbeat. Lexi was confused for a few moments at her stepfather's insolence. She couldn't find the right words. And then, trying not to shout, she asked, Is it okay that this is my mom's apartment and I'm registered here? How am I going to get out of here? Maybe it's you and your difficult junior who will vacate the territory. Kieran should have been in the army a long time ago, but you did your best to get him out of it. And now that bum's overexerting himself, he's groping me. So I want him out of here before I smash his empty head in. When's he going to pinch me again or make me dirty with his eyes? Let that precious one go to his own apartment, that's for rent. Or eventually let him rent, better yet. Both of you dreaming cowards out of here. Isabel didn't know how to extinguish the conflict that had erupted in the family. So she asked, Let us all calm down and tomorrow we'll solve everything calmly. The morning is wiser in the evening. Lexi was uncomfortable with her mom's attitude. But she was so tired of arguing and fighting for her right to live in safety that she didn't even argue, as her stepfather tried to order and went to bed. Her premonitions were grim. Judging by her mother's behavior, she wasn't going to chase any of the men away, so she would have to leave on her own. Okay, at least the session is behind us. You can, as an option, ask for somewhere in a children's camp, even if not a counselor, just as long as here, in the home apartment, where she no longer felt safe, not to stay. Sleep wasn't in either eye. When Lexi heard someone approach the room over the creak of the floors, the girl realized the person on the other side of the door was stomping around, apparently listening to see if the girls were asleep or not. The situation didn't seem to arouse any suspicion. The doorknob crept down and the girl could make out the silhouette of Kieran in the opening. He headed toward her bed and nearly jumped when Lexi's quiet voice sounded. "You make one more move in my direction, and I'll have the whole house ransacked. Will you have to explain what you're doing in a girl's bedroom?" He also whispered back, "Scared you? I'll think of something." The stepbrother was approaching, and Lexi didn't hesitate to yell. She yelled at full force, as if releasing her accumulated irritation and anger. The girl didn't care. Nothing was stopping her. "What's that roaring?" Maggie woke up. And the neighbor from downstairs, a not quite adequate bile man, banged on the radiator. Lexi didn't stop screaming even when her mother and stepfather appeared in the room. The girl was silent only when Kieran splashed a glass of water in her face, which stood on the nightstand of the youngest daughter. It didn't calm the girl, but it did silence her from the liquid that had entered her mouth. "Maggie, stand up for Lexi," the girl pleaded. "Lyra, something you said to Lexi about her selfishness, bad parenting." But the girl didn't care under that eerie cacophony. Lexi hurriedly gathered her things. "I'm not staying here a second longer. I highly doubt Kieran showed up here in the middle of the night to apologize. Anyway, Mom, I'm off and I expect you to pay for your share of this apartment, or get that creep completely out of my sight." Stephen glared at Kieran and his furious stepdaughter with clearly discernible anger, and did not react to his sobbing daughter. Isabel, clutching her head, went to get her medication, reporting to nowhere. "God, what's the big deal about having a material dispute in the middle of the night? I need to take a sedative." Lexi crouched down next to Maggie, stroked her head, said goodbye, and passing the kitchen where her mom sat at the table, reminded her, "I'm expecting a call, and as soon as possible for the rest of your stuff I'll come back later. Hopefully everything will be safe." Lexi was shaking with anger, but she stubbornly walked toward the train station to go to the only person who could help her. In the waiting room, Lexi opened the secret notebook she thought her roommate had given her in 3rd or 4th grade. She found the entry she wanted among the pages: 11 Main Street, Maryberry Village, 11 Main Street. Janie Swan, a line that Eugene had written long ago, when Lexi still had what she thought was a strong, happy family, and said it was his mom's name and address. The man promised that one day they would all go to visit her to try to move past their former differences. Lexi oriented herself and bought a ticket to the station closest to this Holmesley. Based on the information, it would take a walk of about 4 kilometers. But that wasn't what was confusing Lexi. She strained to think about what to say to Janie Swan, how to introduce herself: your son's ex-daughter, your ex-daughter-in-law's daughter. Eugene's acquaintance, the one he'd long thought was his daughter. The girl pored over the options but couldn't find the perfect one. Getting to her destination, however, was a breeze. And soon Lexi was standing at the fence with a sign with the correct address attached to it. She didn't dare to introduce herself to the woman in the tracksuit who was weeding the front garden and, to all appearances, was Janie Swan. She simply asked, "Hi, can I see Eugene?" Lexi had no idea that a quite innocuous phrase could have such an effect. The woman threw herself to the ground and seemed to wriggle like a wounded animal. Lexi hesitated only for a few seconds before dropping her things, opening the wicket and running up to the woman. "Janie Swan, get up. Can I help you?" The elderly woman didn't immediately begin to calm down, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that Lexi was able to lift her off the ground and bring her to a bench under a tree. Janie Swan exhaled noisily, pulled a vial out of her pocket, and ordered, "From home, get me a mug of water and some pills from the fridge." Peering into the box, Lexi spotted the medicine for Stephen and a vial of valerian. She ran into the house, and after quickly finding all the medications she needed, she rushed to find the old lady. On the table, she noticed a photo of Eugene with a black ribbon across it. She felt bitter to the point of tears and sobbed. Eugene was the only person she considered a father, And even though it was Kieran's fault that the relationship between the supposed relatives had been destroyed, Lexi still missed him. She now realized what had caused Janie Swan to react so violently and was completely at a loss as to how to explain who she was and why she had come, so as not to further tear the heart of the poor woman who had lost her son. After all, if it weren't for her complicated, unhappy family history, Lexi would need help. The girl brought pills and water to Janie Swan, and when she took the medicine, she asked, "Should we call the doctors?" Janie Swan shook her head. Then she brushed away a tear and wiped her eyes. She began to study the uninvited guest. The look of genuine regret in her grief-stricken eyes was suddenly prickly and angry. "Is this your fault with your slutty mom?" Poking Lexi painfully in the stomach, the woman slammed her fist on the ground and began to accuse. "You ruined my son, and you live happily yourself. You asshole, you're not even shy enough to come here to see me. If it wasn't for your shameless mother, you wouldn't have cheated my son. I know he'd be with some decent woman now, and everything would be different. I told him as soon as I saw you, a newborn, that Kieran was a scoundrel, trying to bind him to himself as someone else's child." Janichka didn't listen, and here's the result: he crashed his car, and it was as if he never existed. He didn't even leave me a granddaughter or a grandson, his own daughter. They buried him in the damp earth, that's all. There was Zhenya Gladyshev, and he's gone, just a grave left. Get out of my yard. Why did you come here? My eyes wouldn't have seen you." The woman, breathing heavily, got up from the bench and began to step on the guest, showering her with profanity. "You shameless bastard, you shameless mother. Get out before I take the sin on my soul. I'll maim you. I'm going to take my broom and beat you so hard you'll be dead." Lexi mumbled an apology, which Janie Swan didn't even seem to hear, and ran out of the yard, picking up the things that had been left by the fence. The girl decided to visit Eugene's last shelter. She couldn't see him as a stranger after all. She had seen where the cemetery was when she went to the Gladyshev's house, and it was not difficult to find the grave of the son of that mistress who was angry with her. A simple cross with a photograph and a plaque with 2 dates. That was all that was left of Eugene. Lexi felt as if all restraints had been lifted from her. She began to tell in front of the grave everything that plagued her. Tears ran down her cheeks as she complained. "Daddy, I don't know what to do at all. I have to look for a place to live, because my heart knows that my mother is not going to exchange the apartment. I don't want to be stuck in there with those difficult people. I just feel sorry for Maggie, but it's not like I can't help her. I can't help myself." Of course, Lexi didn't expect to have an epiphany at the cemetery and realize how to proceed. But after recounting her misadventures aloud and not holding back her sobs, a blissful emptiness set in. After saying goodbye, Lexi walked to the side and reached out and stroked Eugene's picture. "Goodbye. And don't be offended if I can't come for a long time." Love was leaving. Logs were piled by the fence near some house, and the girl decided to see if there was any live and work in the town next to the village. She pulled out her phone, and in doing so, the smart device, the first assistant of modern man, completely discharged. Her nerves were already on edge without this unpleasantness, and although Lexi thought she had no more tears left, she cried again. The girl didn't notice anything around her, not even the buzzing mosquitoes that stung unprotected parts of her body. Lexi almost jumped when a mocking male voice sounded above her head. "Hey girl, did you decide to make that pond? But it's no good. We have specially stacked logs here for building and you are pouring tears over them. Get up and come with me." Lexi raised her head, wiped away her tears, and looked at the handsome man standing in front of her, about 25 years old. The stranger held out his hand to her. So what was the tragedy? Lexi didn't share the details with the man and blamed her tears on her dead cell phone. "But if you have a charger, it's not a problem. You have my house right behind you. There's a free outlet. Let's go." The man held out his hand to the girl, but Lexi was hesitant to trust the stranger. "Joe," shouted a woman walking down the street. "Who's sitting under the fence?" The man smiled at Lexi and informed, "Joe, it's me. And that's my mom coming." Judging by the bags, the evening bus has arrived, and she and the driver of the sister of the guests handed over. "I'm going to run to meet my mom, and you don't go anywhere. We'll solve the issue with your phone." Lexi had nowhere to go. Without the information support of her smartphone, she felt too insecure, suddenly afraid that she might have forgotten the charger during her hurried packing. The girl opened her bag and searched for it. To her great joy, she had it with her. Lexi exhaled. Now all that was left was to find a place with an outlet. She could try going to the local store. But she had no idea what hours it was open until. Joshua, after taking the bags from his mom, stepped first and hugged the girl and asked, "Well, now you're not afraid to go inside. It's not like we're going to be alone." Lexi replied, "I'm not afraid, but it's probably not very comfortable." "Oh, come on. What's your name, by the way? Because my mom won't understand that I'm bringing a strange girl into the house so easily." "Lexi. Well, nice to meet you. Grab your stuff and follow me. You can meet your mom at the house, 'cause I see you're already pretty bitten by mosquitoes." Joe put his bags on the kitchen floor and started charging his favorite phone. "But it seems to be blinking. Now you have to wait a little while and then you can turn it on and use it," he said. "Thank you, Joshua." Lexi started to thank him, but didn't have time to finish. The lady of the house appeared in the kitchen, breathing noisily. She looked at her guest carefully, rested her hands on her broad sides, and asked her son, "Joe, this girl is not one of ours. Explain who it is that is our guest." "Mom, this is Lexi." "Lexi?" The woman frowned. "What are you, from Glendale? Last name Swan?" The girl didn't deny it, but clarified. "I had to see Eugene Swan. Much to my regret, I was too late." Tiana turned to Joe. "That's not her own daughter. Janie was complaining at the bus stop. She said she came in, gave her a heart attack, and went somewhere else." Joe couldn't resist an ironic remark. If Aunt Janie had had a heart attack, would she have gone to the bus stop instead of the nurse's station? Any alternative means of treatment practiced there? Tiana, as if not noticing her guest, replied to her son, "Oh, Joe. Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Janie wanted to find that newcomer by the hair. She said she wished her mother had kicked her ass when Eugene brought her into the house to meet her. Janie knew right away that her son would be unhappy with that woman, and that's how it happened. But you remember how. He came back from town a few years ago. You should have buried him, honest to God. The women said he brought almost nothing with him. Left it all to his wife and his estranged daughter, Lexi, here. They said Maggie had given him some serious horns during the marriage. Joshua wrinkled his nose. "Mom, you know I try not to listen to gossip." Tiana waved her hand and turned to the girl to satisfy her curiosity. "Where have you been? You've been sitting under our fence all the time. Why didn't you go straight to town or to the station?" Lexi answered, "I went to the cemetery. You may not believe this, but I really feel sorry for my dad. I've never known any other dad. He was the one who wiped my tears when I got my first bad grade. He gave me my first bouquet of flowers, carried me on his shoulders, even braided my pigtails when my mom was busy. It wasn't easy to lose that kind of kinship all at once. She sat at the grave and didn't even notice how much time she spent there." Tiana's heart trembled, but she wondered, why did everything stop at ours? Was it just by chance? Where I could sit, I stopped. I'm sorry to bother you. Now the phone will charge a little, and I'll go away. Joe smiled. "Ma'am, where are you going to go at night?" "By hitchhiking, of course, you can get to town. But a young and beautiful girl is hardly worth the risk. Mom, let's let Lexi sleep on the couch in the summer kitchen. It's warm, and she won't get cold. I'll take her tomorrow morning." Tiana was indignant. "So as to rush to the aunt to pick up the transmitter, then you have no time. And when you go for a ride with a girl, I'd be happy to do that. It's not dark yet, though. We can pick honeysuckle, pea pods and strawberries, radishes, parsley and onions outside. It'll be fresher tomorrow morning. Take everything to your aunt and take it to her. Let her sell it. Now the first herbs, berries and vegetables are expensive. Everything will be a help." The woman shifted her gaze to Lexi and demanded, "Anyway, while your phone is charging, let's go. Give me a hand, young lady. I need to get some rest since we're on the road tomorrow morning." Although picking small honeysuckle berries wasn't Lexi's usual task, she did it quite nimbly. Slowly but surely the cups filled with gray berries. Just as Tiana had instructed, Lexi didn't fill them to the top and compose them into the box with the cells. When the two bushes were relieved of their burden, Tiana called out to the girl, "Come here." As Lexi approached, the woman outlined a new front of work for her. "Look, pick the pea pods carefully, not all of them. Don't touch the unripe ones. You also need to make your bed." Lexi nodded. She wanted to thank the people who had decided to take her in. She didn't feel strong enough to go anywhere right now. At least a little respite was needed after the harvest was done. Tiana invited both her son and the uninvited guest to the table. It was only at that moment, when the smell of potatoes stewed with meat reached the girl, that she realized that all she had eaten all day was pies and soda at the train station. Trying not to look hungry, Lexi started eating. However, the attentive, scrutinizing glances Joshua was throwing at her made it hard for her to relax. The man really liked the girl, slender, modest, not a nasty character. She went together with his mother to the vegetable garden without any problems. She didn't even gesture her displeasure. And this despite the fact that it was obvious the girl is clearly a city girl, unused to the fresh air. She sits sluggishly after tea, her eyes closed. But the conversation her mother was having with her, asking about her life, was supportive. Joshua didn't really listen to the dialogue, but he even felt sorry for the guest who got instead of dinner to the interrogation, and he decided to stop the torment of the unfortunate. "Mom, we're leaving early tomorrow. Just get Lexi some bedding, or else she just won't be able to wake up in time for tomorrow." Lexi, who was really tired both physically and mentally, looked at the man gratefully, and Joshua realized that he wished the girl would always look at him like that. He liked her more and more every minute. In the morning, Joshua drove Lexi to the neighborhood center, and as he prepared to park near his aunt's house, he asked the girl, "Listen, are you heading back to your hometown or what?" The girl shrugged. "I don't know. I still have to think about it. I can't go home. I will probably look for a place in some children's institution. Of course, I don't have a diploma yet, but I have my credits with me. Maybe someone will take pity on a student. I'm looking for a live-in position." Joe slapped himself on the forehead and said, "Look, why didn't I think of that? Let's go to my aunt's house together. Maybe she needs a helper for the summer season. She lives alone in her apartment, and I think she needs company." So Lexi found herself in a small district center 100 kilometers from his hometown at Joshua's Aunt Digit. The apartment was decorated in a minimalist style, and the girl was not very cozy in it. After a short acquaintance, the hostess asked Lexi to sit in the kitchen, and together with her nephew, she went into the far room and asked, "Well, why did you bring me this girl here? I have a decent apartment, by the way. Your mom already called me and warned me that you may not come alone. She's the one that Eugene's dumbass raised as his own for years. Her nephew saved her from having to tell the woman the situation. Lexi had simply asked him to get her a job at the market. That's it? I'm not going to be alone, Digit snapped. No, Joe, I can't trust anyone I don't know. It's a trade, after all. Especially since I've got a score to settle with that girl's mama. You were just a kid when Eugene brought that girl to the village to show her off. He wanted to marry me before that, by the way. How can I live in the same apartment with that bitch's daughter? That Lexi's family is rotten. So nephew, I'm sorry. Joshua tried to change his aunt's mind. But kids aren't responsible for their parents' sins. Or, in this case, the mother. Lexi seems pretty sane, so I don't think you'll regret it. Don't even say it. You want to help this Lexi. Give her some money to get home, and she can get a job in her big city. The wages are higher there, the landlady said. The hostess and her nephew entered the kitchen, and Digit said bluntly, I'm sorry, but I have my own private life, and your presence will be out of place. And I don't need any helpers. As they say, I can handle everything myself. Joshua didn't want to part with the beautiful Lexi, and he thought feverishly about how he could get her phone number. To the man's surprise, the girl wasn't upset at all, but even pleased. It's good that you don't have to. I was looking through the ads in my phone in a special boarding house, which somewhere, judging by the map, here in the area, requires a cleaner. Not a very prestigious profession, of course, but not deadly. In addition, an accommodation and food is provided. It's a fabulous offer. The only disadvantage is that there is no public transportation to this boarding house, as the smartphone suggested, so I would have to order a cab. A wild number just popped up on the screen. Joshua, I just have a favor to ask. Lend me the money to get there. As soon as I get my first paycheck, I'll wire it to you. But what if you go there, see it, listen to it, and you don't like it? Why don't I take you there? I'll wait to make sure everything's all right, and then I'll leave, Joe suggested. Digit, who had overheard this dialogue taking place in her kitchen, was not too surprised at his nephew's insistence. Joshua had always had a crush, ever since he was a little boy. I remember when he was about 6 years old, he brought a girl from the next street over to his house and told her that she was his fiancée who would be living with him. He also had a few hobbies at school. At the send-off to the army, at least 3 girls were shedding tears over him, and he had already grown up. After serving, Joshua returned to the village with his fiancée. She couldn't live in such conditions for long, though, and fled to her homeland before the wedding march. As far as Digit knew, Joe was not at all saddened by the failure of his marriage. He even seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and continued to lead an unmonastic life. And now the woman noticed a familiar gleam of excitement in her nephew's eyes. The hunter had his next victim in sight. Maybe she should have warned the poor thing, but Digit preferred not to interfere. First of all, this Lexi was clearly of legal age, from what the woman knew. Secondly, she had a beef with the woman's mother. Third, Digit knew her nephew. If he wanted the girl, he would get her. So let them do whatever they wanted, as long as they didn't touch her. Joshua gallantly opened the car door for Lexi, and Digit, watching the couple from the window, realized that the naive-looking young woman would have little chance to resist. Her instincts and experience did not fail her. Joe had really managed to get Lexi to like him, though he had to try harder, of course. Most of the thoughts of the girl, who was hired for a seasonal job at the boarding house, were occupied with the problem of housing. Lexi called her mom to see how she was going to solve the pressing apartment issue. But Tiana pleaded for more time. Daughter, but it's not that simple. We only have a 1-bedroom apartment in the bedroom district of the city, not a mansion on the main street. If you're going to do a 2-bedroom exchange, "It's not going to work," she said almost every time she answered the same thing. Lexi, who monitored virtual bulletin boards in her free time and thought of different options, once couldn't stand it and said, "Mom, and why did you even decide to change our apartment? Think about the fact that this housing you have a marriage. If you decide to divide it and then buy another apartment, then on its part will already be your future husband to claim in case of anything. I think it would be easiest to move Kieran to the apartment that his father Stephen rents to tenants." There was silence on the phone for a few seconds. Lexi guessed that there was some problem she didn't know about and asked directly, "Mom, just answer me honestly, what's going on with your Stephen's apartment? Does he even have one? Or has he been bullshitting you all these years?" Tiana, sighing, confessed, "Stephen had an apartment, but he had to sell it in a hurry to keep Kieran out of jail. As it turned out, Laura had thrown him out of her home and life for a reason. Stephen did not tell me everything in detail, but the story could have ended badly for Kieran. Good thing the injured party agreed not to go to the police and settled the matter peacefully. Anyway, that's the way it is, daughter." Lexi kept trying to get her mom to understand that a person who had to buy her freedom with the price of an apartment could be dangerous. "Mom, do you realize that? Putting himself and Maggie in danger. Obviously, this Kieran did not pick flowers from the flower bed or take change from other people's pockets. I mean, he's committed a pretty serious crime. And Daddy's a hard worker. Instead of letting his son go where he belongs, he sold the apartment and paid off a just retribution. Okay, Stephen's not afraid of his offspring, but why are you letting Kieran under the same roof as you and Maggie? Let him work, get his own apartment, and preferably far away." Lexi was not so much tired of the work, which, to be honest, was a lot, as from the constant persuasion. She could not persuade her mother to push her to close Kieran's access to the apartment. The only outlet for the girl was communication with Joshua. The man came to see her every weekend, and sometimes even on weekdays. At meetings, he showered her with compliments, brought various sweets and natural country products. The fewer days left until the end of the last shift, the more Lexi worried, not even knowing what to do. The deciding factor was one of the conversations she had with Joshua, who, hugging her tightly, whispered in her ear, "Ah, Lexi, my love, no other way than a spell lived. How will I be without you? I don't know. Why don't you transfer to a correspondence school and move in with me? I'm out to here. I'll wither away without you. I know you're all high and mighty, but I'm from the bottom of the ladder, as they say." Lexi didn't say anything, but she liked the idea of moving. She felt herself falling in love with this man who cared for her so easily. Plus, if she accepted the invitation, she wouldn't have to go back to her mom's apartment and watch the nasty faces of Stephen and his offspring. Of course, it would take longer to study by correspondence, but it would be possible to live with the person she loved, even without formalizing the relationship. While the girl was thinking, Joe whispered, "You do not think. I'm not just offering you to come and live without a registry office. I realize that it's probably important to you. Just a little before the wedding happens, you'll come to me. That's all." Lexi looked Joshua in the eye to make sure he was serious. And he, as if catching a shadow of doubt, confirmed, "Yes, I'm asking you to get married. It usually takes a month from the time you apply to the time you get married, but it means practically nothing. You'll live as a wife from the first day you step foot in the house." Lexi agreed and spun in a whirlwind of happy worries. Tiana wasn't particularly happy that her son had brought Lexi home as his bride, but she could hear laughter coming from Joshua's room. The woman, wrinkling her nose squeamishly, whispered softly, "Having fun. I wish they were ashamed of me." They'd decided to have the wedding on neutral ground in Hartford, where Lexi had spent the summer. The bride, who already guessed that she was pregnant with her beloved Joe, did not want a large celebration and was glad that the future mother-in-law supports her. "Oh, it's not fashionable to have the whole village together now," Tiana said. Yes, and rightly so. The money that will be spent on food and drink is better spent on something useful. Joshua's car needs changing, the roof needs fixing. And buy you a new bed, not so creaky, I think. Tiana couldn't help but sneer. In the end, Lexi invited only Isabel's mom and Maggie to sit in a modest cafe. She didn't want to see Stephen and Kieran at the table on the festive day. On the groom's side, only his mother had come. Aunt Digit refused to participate in the celebration flatly. Both Joshua, privy to the long history with Eugene, and the bride's mom understood why. Maggie missed her big sister. She sat on her lap for almost the entire meal. When after a modest sit-down, relatives of the bride and the newlyweds with the mother of the newlyweds had to leave in different directions, the girl even cried. Lexi's tears flowed too. She already had a hard time controlling her emotions and nerves. After a month of living with the restless Tiana, they were stretched to the limit. The woman literally wouldn't let her lie down to rest. All she had for Lexi was to work in the vegetable garden and greenhouse, to roll up jars with crops, to cook and clean the house. It was the daughter-in-law who had to do everything. Joshua, of course, helped whenever possible. But Tiana, for example, when she saw her son peeling onions, she would chase him out of the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "Doing woman's work. Go do Devonian things do." If the unhappy young woman in her mother's apartment was not a sweet life, then here she sometimes wanted to howl like a wolf. Tiana had taken almost everything from her. When Lexi told her about her pregnancy and the fact that she was having trouble tolerating certain smells because of her toxicosis, her mother-in-law went ballistic. When she was alone with her daughter-in-law, Tiana would bring up the young woman. "You come on, do not pretend in front of me. What am I, wasn't I pregnant? If you're sick, take an apple from the dirt and get to work. You know, they used to give birth in the fields and it was okay, they were all strong." Lexi didn't have the energy to argue and prove anything. She almost always wanted to sleep. From a cheerful and active beauty, she turned into a lifeless creature with bags under her eyes. Lexi realized that the pregnancy was going very differently than her mother had carried Maggie and was terrified. One day she complained to Joshua. "I was told by Amelie from your paramedic office that swelling is the norm. When I told her that the internet advises further tests for such symptoms, she blatantly told me to go to the bathroom." Joshua: "I'm afraid Amelie is being a little careless with what I tell her. I don't have the best symptoms. Take me to the women's clinic, at least in the district center." Hearing this, Tiana didn't bitch. "Yes, our Amelie has experience as old as you are not. But a respected doctor should not be stipulated in my house. If she says you're normal, then you are. You're so smart. Do you want me to make remarks? That's right, she sent you away, you faker. You're a noble woman. If you don't trust Amelie, go to the district center. The bus runs twice a day. You leave in the morning, come back in the evening. Joshua won't have to travel. And the budget will be saved. You haven't brought a penny home, and you're still trying to ride our coattails to paradise. There's some dill on the shelf, brew it and drink it. It helped me with swelling." Showing thus care, the future grandmother went to one of her girlfriends, and Lexi, left alone with her husband, began to persuade. "Joshua, please take me to the district center. I feel like no amount of dill can help my condition. Why risk it?" The man nodded, but the woman was in a hurry to get somewhere and promised, "Okay, I'll figure something out." In the morning, however, when Lexi woke up, her spouse was no longer around. The woman got dressed and looked out into the yard. The car wasn't there either, and Tiana was fiddling in the front garden. "Good morning," Lexi greeted her mother-in-law. "Do you happen to know when Joshua will be back?" Without taking her eyes off her work, Tiana answered, "By tonight he probably will be. Digit had some kind of accident at work, and he rushed over to help." It was so frustrating that tears sprang from her eyes. Why didn't her husband wake her up when he knew she had to go to the district center? She would have packed in no time. To be more precise, she had everything already prepared for a visit to the counseling center. After getting a bottle of water, Lexi took her bag and, trying to calm down, headed for the gate. "How far are you going?" "I should pick some carrots. The forecast says it's going to rain next week." I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. "I'll go and wash them now, and then you'll go with a bucket and pick them." "How to sit down at the table so you are in the lead. And when you help, so you run from the yard." Lexi turned around and, not holding back tears, answered, "I have to go to the hospital." "Where?" "Joshua could have given me a ride, by the way. Or did you talk him out of it on purpose so he could go alone?" "I've been working on my carrots." "That's very thoughtful of you." Tiana was angry. "Lot. Oh, that's how you talk. That's a snake on your chest, on your bread." Lexi did not listen to what insults her mother-in-law would come up with and headed to the bus stop so as not to miss the bus. The woman managed to get to a paid appointment with the doctor only closer to lunchtime. As expected, additional tests were prescribed which could not be taken for free. However, the rather young doctor who was in charge of the appointment advised her, "I certainly do not have the right to force you to urgently run and take tests in a paid center. However, when I was in your place, I did exactly that. Now, my son is already 5 years old, just thanks to the timely diagnosed problem and correctly prescribed treatment. It is scary to think what would have happened if things had been different." Lexi thanked the doctor and called her husband as she left the counseling building. "Joshua, I'm in the district center right now. Please drive up. I may not have enough money because I still have to take paid tests." The doctor wasn't exactly scary, but I don't think there's any point in dragging it out now that I'm here. The man didn't apologize for leaving this morning without his wife. He even resented it. "Do you know where I can get the money? Do you think I'm printing it?" Lexi, hearing a woman's laughter and squeals in the background on the phone, as if someone was tickling someone, was so surprised she even ignored her husband's rudeness. "Joshua, your mom said you went off to help Aunt Digit and you're out somewhere having fun. What is that supposed to mean anyway?" Instead of an answer, however, the phone buzzed instead. In further attempts to call Joshua, the woman heard that the caller was unavailable. In the paid laboratory, the charming girl who was doing the paperwork asked if Lexi had eaten, made a discount, and after the blood draw even poured hot tea and offered cookies. "Please help yourself. I can imagine how hungry you are. The time is well past 12. Lexi, embarrassed, asked how much tea and cookies would cost, and the girl laughed merrily. "What do you mean? Everything is free. Here is a vase, there are candies. They are, however, tiny but very tasty. Take them, don't be shy." Lexi modestly took a few pieces, and when she learned that the next day the results would be sent to her email, she thanked the kind girl who had been much more helpful to her than her mother-in-law and husband. Barely had Lexi come up for air when she got a call from Joshua. "Tell me where to pull up. I'm free." Lexi gave the address and was soon driving with her husband toward his village. The tired woman didn't want to cause a scandal, so she offered him a candy bar as a gesture of goodwill. "Try it. A girl from the receptionist's office gave it to me in the laboratory." The man, who was expecting to find out about the relationship, realized that the threat of a quarrel had passed and gladly ate the candy. But Tiana, as soon as Joshua and Lexi crossed the threshold of the house, began to throw thunder and lightning. "Son, that's just outrageous," Tiana exclaimed. "All right, you're off to help Didget. It's the right thing to do, not to leave a relative in need. But after you, this one went off to the middle of nowhere." Lexi tried to defend herself with indignation. "Actually, I told you and Joshua that I was going to the district hospital. By the way, I'm concerned about your grandson's health, Tiana. The doctor said that the test should be taken, and that swelling like I have is not normal." The old woman grinned. These doctors just want to get more money out of you. And it is still unknown whose baby is being carried. Probably slept with half the staff at the boarding house. And you're trying to fool your Joshua? You think your mom pulled that stunt? You think it's going to work for you? Tiana twisted the shape from her fingers and held it up to Lexi's face. I'm not Janie Swan, I won't stand for it. After this rant, she sat back in her chair, placed her palm on the left side of her chest, and turning to her son, stated, Joshua, get her out of my sight at once. If you found her under the fence, let her go there. That's where your whore of a woman belongs. You'll find a good woman. The sooner you get her out of your life, the better. Eugene was messing around with her mom. What's the result? She's lying in a cemetery, Janie Swan crying her eyes out. Too soft. She couldn't get her son back on her side in the first place, so she's left alone and unsupported in her old age. I don't want that for you or myself. Lexi's eyes darkened at her mother-in-law's words, and she tried not to faint, to the delight of her mother-in-law's gloating. The woman, slowly, leaning against the wall, began to move toward the bedroom. There were no tears, one solid fright caused by an unusual sensation. Her stomach felt strangely cramped, but Lexi knew with her female intuition that it wasn't from hunger. Carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements, she began to put things away. A few minutes later, Joe entered the room and began to coax. Lexi, what are you freaking out? It's not a big deal. Mom's overreacting. She doesn't really think that. Mom's sitting in the kitchen right now, worrying, taking heart drops. Lexi raised her head and looked at her husband. That's it, Joe. I've had enough of this family life. You know, when I had to run away from home, I promised myself that I would never take abuse. But for some reason, I've broken that promise repeatedly to this day. But that's not even the worst part. I'm terribly hurt that you can never say a word in my defense. I was wrong to believe that I could be happy. Lexi had barely spoken those words when another painful spasm pierced her. In a muffled voice, the woman ordered, Get dressed. I don't feel well. Take me to the hospital. Tiana, who, as it turned out, was not sitting in the kitchen, but was eavesdropping on the conversation between the couple, intervened. Why are you helping your son? He just arrived from the district center, and again must take you somewhere. I won't let him go. By God, I won't let him go. Lexi, realizing that the bickering with her mother-in-law could be fatal, was already dialing the emergency number to call an ambulance. The 45 minutes it took for the paramedics to arrive were the longest of the woman's life. The pain would sometimes subside briefly, and then she would continue to gather her belongings. When her insides twisted like a tight spring again, she sat down in the computer chair, opened the back, and tried, despite the urge to curl up, to relax completely and breathe calmly and measuredly. Joshua went against his mother's wishes and volunteered to accompany his wife to the hospital. Tiana only managed to insist that her son ride in the ambulance instead of her own car. Upon waking up from the anesthesia, Lexi felt terribly thirsty and dizzy. Her vision gradually became clearer, but the woman looked around the room and saw empty beds in the corners, as if deepening gray shadows. Lexi blinked hard, and when she opened her eyes, she noted with satisfaction that they were gone. Gradually, the sounds returned as well. Lexi could hear someone pacing up and down the hallway, someone walking behind the wall, someone talking. Somewhere nearby, an elevator was making noise. Taking into account all sorts of devices that came into view, the specific odor of medicines and detergents, Lexi concluded that she was in a hospital. The assumption turned out to be correct. Soon a woman in a medical uniform entered, moistened Lexi's lips with a wet wipe, and greeted her. Welcome back. How are you feeling? Nothing, just very dizzy, Lexi replied hoarsely. My throat is also dry. but that's normal. Anesthesia is a thing. What's your name? Do you remember? Lexi. That's a great name. All right, Lexi, we're going to keep you here for a little while longer and get you back to your room. You're going to be under a doctor's care for a few days, and then home. Excuse me, please, but what about my baby? Lexi asked the most important question, but got a very evasive answer. Lexi, I'm just an anesthesiologist. The doctor will tell you everything in detail, don't worry. Lexi nodded, which made her eyes blurry, and it was as if she fell into a viscous, unnatural dream. After waking up again, she felt much better, though perhaps she was even more thirsty. No sooner had the woman pressed the call button, unnoticed earlier, than a nurse with a gurney came to pick her up. Well, my dear, let's slowly move here. I will take you to the ward now. Lexi was worried about the baby. As soon as the doctor approached her and began to ask questions about her well-being, the woman quietly asked, "How is my baby?" Lexi's downcast eyes made it all clear as some terms she didn't understand came through the water column. Toward the end of the explanation, the doctor spoke words of comfort. The surgery was a success. You will definitely be able to become a mom after the recovery period. Of course, you rest now. In the evening in the treatment room for a shot, come by all means. The doctor left, fighting the urge to scream. Lexi looked at the nightstand by the bed and was pleased to see her bag. Reaching in, the woman pulled out her cell phone and dialed her husband's number. "Joe, listen to me and don't worry. Gather all my things, bring them to me at the hospital when I'm discharged. I'll let you know the date and time later. We'll stop by the registry office, file for divorce, and you can be completely free." The man tried to say something, but Lexi wouldn't listen to him. Running away from home, transferring to distance learning, and insulting her mother-in-law were now considered insignificant events compared to the loss of her child. Now Lexi decided to go back to the apartment where Stephen and his son had taken up residence and kicked them out. Would Mom like it or not? They didn't want to do it the easy way, so they'll do it the right way. We still have to find out what crime Kieran committed to expose the bastard. But that's after the dizziness stops. Instead of a few days in the hospital, it was a week. But it gave Lexi time to think things through. Calls from her mother-in-law were dropped, not answered. And when Tiana tried to talk to her daughter-in-law from her son's cell phone, Lexi cut off her lamentations. "You know what? You two go under the fence. And don't call me again." Joshua complied with everything Lexi asked and didn't even discourage the divorce. He just dropped the woman off at the train station. "Lexi, don't hold it against me and Mom. She didn't mean for this to happen. It was an accident." The woman didn't say anything back and didn't even slam the car door, even though she wanted to. Lexi hadn't warned her mom about her return. As she walked in, she was surprised that no one was in the apartment. On the one hand, that was a relief, but on the other hand, it was almost 10 p.m. And surely Maggie had to be home with someone. The bedroom Lexi shared with her little sister was relatively tidy, considering the little girl who lived there. In the rest of the rooms, however, the woman noticed signs of what looked like hurried packing. Lexi headed for the kitchen, automatically looking in the refrigerator. Lexi was amazed that the fridge was almost empty and put the kettle on. Just then, Isabel's mom and Maggie walked into the apartment. "Oh, my daughter." Isabel was so happy. "I'm so glad to see you." Maggie grabbed her older sister by the legs and began to persuade her. "Don't go away again." Lexi crouched down to hug the girl and began to comfort her. "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere else." Later, when Lexi read her little sister a book and the girl fell asleep, Isabel apologized to her daughter. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry you were right. Stephen and Kieran got involved with bad business. Now they're in remand. Kieran's old crime has also come to light. The two women sat in the kitchen for a long time, dropping tears into their tea. And then Lexi suggested, "Mom, let's sell this apartment and move somewhere else. There are too many unpleasant memories here." Isabel agreed. Soon Mom and her two daughters settled in a town 300 kilometers away from home. Lexi transferred to the local university. She also met a nice single neighbor at the front door. She didn't believe in lightning-fast love anymore and agreed to marry Jason only after a few years. Isabel, who had ruined the lives of so many loved ones by marrying Stephen, devoted herself fully to taking care of Maggie and the twins Lexi and her husband had.